Chapter 2025. Wei Zihong looked for a while and said, "This person is now a disciple of Yanzhong Monastery. If we capture him directly, it won't look good for us. Let's greet the elders first." As a mortal metamorphosis, he didn't need to care about the thoughts of the cultivators below him when dealing with the demons from the outside world. However, Yanzhong Monastery had contributed greatly to the fight against Yuxiao School. Even the sect master Li Xiaomi died because of this, so he should give him some respect. Shindong also knew the reason, so he didn't object. The two figures suddenly disappeared from where they were. When they reappeared, they were already in front of Yanzhong Monastery's camp on Mount Tonghai. The two Yuanying elders of Yanzhong Monastery suddenly sensed something and hurriedly came out to greet them. They bowed and said, "Greetings, venerable ones. I didn't know you were here. Please forgive me for my lack of manners." They were also anxious when two mortal metamorphoses came together. They didn't know what this was about. Wei Zihong nodded slightly to return the greeting. He said, "Sect Master Shen and I are here to discuss something with you too." One of the elders, Gao, quickly turned sideways and made a gesture of invitation. He said, "Venerable ones, please come in and have a seat." Wei Zihong and Shindong didn't stand on ceremony and followed him into the inner courtyard. When they sat in the inner room, a servant came up to serve tea. Wei Zihong took a sip and put it down. Elder Gao knew what to do. He waved his hand and dismissed all the servants and maids. He said carefully, "Sect Master Wei is talking about." Wei Zihong said straightforwardly, "Within a year, a demon came from beyond the heavens. Due to an unforeseen event, it escaped the interception of the sun and moon gods and landed in the 6 continents of the North Sea. Fearing that it would cause trouble, the fellow Taoists of the various sects asked me and Sect Master Shen to come here to investigate." Shindong said in a deep voice, "Among the people in this battle, there is someone from your sect that is suspected to be this person." Elder Gao was shocked and couldn't sit still. He said, "Venerable ones, may I ask who it is?" A demon that could make a mortal metamorphosis cultivator come out was needless to say what level it was. Knowing that such a demon was hiding in his sect, he was also very nervous. With a thought from Wei Zihong, the figure of a young man appeared in the minds of the two elders. When the two elders saw this person, they looked at each other and revealed hesitation. The other elder with the surname he spoke with difficulty, "Esteemed sirs, this matter. I'm afraid there's been a mistake." Wei Zihong raised his eyebrows and looked over, asking, "Why does elder he say so?" Under his gaze, elder he felt the pressure increase, but he braced himself and said, "I won't hide it from you too. This Luoying is the reincarnation of our former sect master." Elder Gao stood up, bowed to the two of them, and said, "We have examined this disciple. This matter is definitely true. If a Taoist cultivator reincarnated, then his direct disciple would have an invisible karmic connection. Moreover, this reincarnated body would not enter the Tao. Usually, there would be someone to look after each reincarnation and leave behind a record. When the time was right to enter the Tao, then the reincarnation would enter the sect. It could be said that the reincarnation would always be under the eyes of the sect. Generally speaking, there would be no mistakes." Wei Zihong said, "Oh. Was he the reincarnation of Jinrenli? I've never heard of him before." Elder Gao bowed and said bitterly, "Yan Zhongguan's influence is small, and the reincarnation of the former sect master is especially important, so we have been hiding the news." Yan Zhongguan hadn't disclosed Li Xiaomi's reincarnation in advance because Yan Zhongguan was the weakest among the 3 sects, and most of them were demonic cultivators. There were many people who hated them. They were really afraid that they would be targeted by others and it would be difficult to protect them. Shentong said in a deep voice, "Whether it is or not, we'll know once we summon this person." The two elders looked at each other. They couldn't refuse Jinren Fan Tu's request. Moreover, even though they were confident, if something really went wrong, they couldn't afford to bear the consequences. Yan Zhongguan would suffer a loss. Elder he walked to the side, called a disciple in, and said, "Go and summon Luoying. If he asks anything, you don't have to say anything." The disciple was also clever and said in a low voice, I understand. Elder He Daoren said, go. He returned to his seat and said, he will be here in a moment. After a while, the sound of footsteps came from outside, and a young man walked in. His skin was fair, and his eyes were full of spirit. He wore a brocade yellow band on his forehead, and bright jade was inlaid in the middle. He stood out from the crowd, and his bearing was graceful. His appearance was extremely good. He came up and bowed, saying, greetings to the two elders. Elder Gao hurriedly said, these are the two Shangzhen, come and greet them. Shangzhen. Luoying couldn't help but show a trace of shock, but she could see that he had a good temperament, so she suppressed it and came up to bow solemnly, saying, greetings to the two Shangzhen. Wei Zihong looked at him with interest and said, aren't you afraid of being exposed by coming here like this? Luoying was startled and said hesitantly, I don't understand what you mean by that. Wei Zihong smiled and said, although you hide it very well, a different kind is a different kind. You don't have to do such a useless thing in front of us. Luoying was even more confused and said, I don't know what you mean by that. If I have done something wrong, please tell me. If I have done something wrong, I am willing to accept punishment. Wei Zihong ignored his words and said, if you really cover up your memory and completely hide it from yourself, it is also a skill. But you don't want to give up your name, yet you still dare to come here. Should I say that you are arrogant or arrogant? Luoying was even more puzzled. He looked at the two elders for help. Elder Gao Daoren said, this, Shangzhen, are you really mistaken? Wei Zihong said, you said this is the reincarnation of Zhenrenli. Elder Gao hesitated for a moment and said, with my shallow eyesight, I think it is not bad. Wei Zihong smiled and said, I have seen a person these days. I should say that he is the reincarnation of Zhenrenli. What? The two elders were really surprised. Elder Gao hurriedly asked, may I know who sect leader Wei is talking about? Wei Zihong said, he is one of the 3 rogue cultivators who entered the competition. His name is Zhengjiang. As long as we find this person and check him, the two elders will know who is the real one and who is the fake one. Luo Ying's face was still full of grievance and anger, but now that he heard this, he couldn't help but sigh. All these expressions disappeared, and his face fell. He sighed and said, so you really know. There is no need to check. He admitted to Wei Zihong and Shindong, I am the alien you are looking for. As soon as he said this, his qi suddenly rose. In the eyes of Wei Zihong and Shindong, his whole body was no longer what it was in front of them. Instead, it was crystal clear, like a long snake made of starlight. It was clearly a void creature. However, before his qi could rise, it took the initiative to restrain itself. Obviously, he just revealed his identity and didn't dare to be presumptuous here. Although Elder Gao and Elder He were mentally prepared, their hearts were still shaken. Elder Gao was shocked and angry. He pointed at him and said, how did you get around the restriction on it? It wasn't difficult for a mortal metamorphosis level demon to deceive them, but the problem was that even the things that Li Xiumi left behind had restrictions placed by the Clear Feather sect leader. Later on, this person severed his mortal body and didn't forget to place restrictions on those things. If those things were taken by an outsider, there would definitely be a conflict and it would be discovered by Yan Zhongguan. However, the problem was that nothing unexpected happened during the process. Luoying said, if I break the restriction on it by force, it will indeed alarm you, but I have a skill that allows me to take other people's karma for my own use. He carefully looked at Wei Zihong, and that person should be the Zhengjiang that this Shangzhen mentioned. So that person is the reincarnation of the previous sect leader. We almost made a big mistake. Elder Gao angrily looked at Luoying. He was also afraid. If this matter was really hidden, it was hard to imagine what would happen to Yan Zhongguan in the future. Wei Zihong looked at Luoying with interest and said, why didn't you fight back? Luoying smiled bitterly and said, the reason why I hid before was because I was afraid that you would find me. I know that there are many people who are stronger than me in this world, so there is no chance of winning. Since I entered this world, I haven't killed anyone. If I don't fight back, I still have some hope of survival. But if I fight back, I will definitely die. At this time, Wei Zihong flicked his sleeve and threw out a black pill. He lightly said, "Since you are tactful, then swallow it and come with me." Luoying struggled for a moment, but he still took the pill and swallowed it. In an instant, his vitality was reduced to nothing. His whole body seemed to have lost its spirit. He looked dispirited and listless. At this moment, he really didn't have the strength to resist. Wei Zihong rolled his sleeve again and put it away. He said, "Two elders, this matter is over. We will take our leave." The two elders quickly bowed and said, "Respectfully send off the two of you." When the two looked up again, they found that the two of them had disappeared. Elder Gao's expression changed at this time. He said, "Quick, Elder He, quickly go and fetch the reincarnation of the former sect master. If he loses in the battle, we will not be able to redeem ourselves even if we die 10,000 times." In the main hall of Qinghuan Palace in Xianyuan Heaven, Zhang Yan's body was glowing brilliantly, but if one looked closely, the wisps of light were no longer limited to this part of the world, but had spread to every corner of Busu Heaven. This meant that it wouldn't take long, at most a few years, for Busu Tian to fall into his hands. But he could also feel that as the final moment approached, the last bit of strange power in Busu Tian began to churn. This was the last struggle and counterattack. So now, in different worlds, more or less, there were some incidents. Strictly speaking, this was the matter of Wei Zihong and Shindong going to investigate. The void creature only instinctively headed towards the places with abundant spiritual vigor. Originally, it should have been killed by Bo Bai and Bo Xian. However, due to the change in Busu's unusual power, it caused a flaw in the heavenly design, and that was how it managed to slip through. It could be said that at this time, all kinds of accidents could happen. But these things didn't need him to show up. He had already informed Dan Yi and the others, and as long as they and the sects of the other worlds were careful, it wouldn't be difficult to solve. The only trouble now was that he found that the Chaos Heaven was getting closer and closer, and it seemed that it would connect to Busu Tian first. He suddenly had a feeling that if he didn't complete the task of controlling Busu Tian before the Chaos Heaven arrived, something might happen because of this place. He thought about it carefully, and out of caution, this sign obviously couldn't be ignored. So, he changed his divine will and suddenly accelerated the process of controlling Busu Tian. Chapter 2026. In the silence, Daoist Xinchang was originally comprehending the Tao in the land of forestalling, but suddenly, he felt his heart palpitate. Feeling that something was wrong, he immediately tried to calculate, but he found nothing and could not make any headway. At this time, a shadow flashed outside. It was Taoist Zhang Yuan. He came up and bowed, then said with a serious expression, "Fellow Taoist, did you notice it?" Taoist Xinchang nodded, but he couldn't help but show a trace of worry. The feeling was not obvious at first, but now it was getting more and more intense. It was extremely oppressive, as if a great disaster was coming. Taoist Zhang Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you think it's because that existence is coming?" This was the last thing he wanted to see, but it was the most consistent with the current inference. Taoist Xinchang sighed and said, "It's hard to know." Fellow Taoist Xianyuan must have also sensed such an unusual movement. Now, we only need to see if the place where he is seeking refuge has been arranged properly. If we can't stay there, we will have to fight if that existence comes. Taoist Zhang Yuan nodded silently. After Zhang Yan asked them for advice on how to pass the Enlightenment Pass, he went into closed-door training. Later, they couldn't sense his whereabouts anymore. Taoist Zhang Yuan guessed that the latter must have opened the world of tranquility, and was probably still immersed in cultivation. Therefore, they could do nothing but wait. In the Cangqing world of tranquility, Taoist Qing Sheng's expression was extremely serious. He also felt that something was wrong, but his cultivation was higher than that of ordinary deities, so he was sure that this matter was definitely related to that existence. Before that existence came, he already knew that he couldn't compete with it. He thought to himself, everything in the void is normal, and that existence is far from coming. But now, something like this has happened. Could it be that some unforeseen event is about to happen? As he thought of this, his heart stirred. Could it be related to the place of creation essence behind that fellow Taoist? If that was the case, it might be good news. However, he felt that it was slightly troublesome. He originally intended to gather some essence of creation and send it to Zhang Yan, so that even if he couldn't form a relationship with Zhang Yan, he could still help Zhang Yan. But now, it was obviously too late for him to do this. Now he could only try to pay attention. As long as Zhang Yan's mana and qi activity appeared, he would immediately rush over to see if he could obtain his permission to seek protection from that side. In the present world, as Zhang Yan's consciousness continued to spread, the entire Busushan faintly trembled. At this time, in the various realms, countless beasts began to throb. Not only that, but there was an inexplicable flaw in the previously sealed area, which was supposed to be a very stable place, causing the monsters and fiendish demons that were imprisoned to escape. There were also some people who disappeared inexplicably. Most of them were gods from the Kunshe continent, and most of them were gods of mountains and rivers who had been sent to the continent. Most importantly, there were also some gods who guarded the kingdoms. Once the kingdoms of the Tao lost the protection of gods, the vassal kingdoms themselves might not be able to withstand the beasts of the wastelands. Therefore, the kingdoms were in a state of chaos. Even the vassal kingdoms that still had gods guarding them were afraid that they would encounter a similar situation, so they slaughtered livestock and beasts to pray for peace. In addition, there were also void creatures and greater demons that began to madly rush into the various realms. The more abundant the spiritual opportunity, the more it suffered. Fortunately, the sects had been warned in advance and were already on guard. But because of the confusion of the heavenly workings, there were always some otherworldly creatures that slipped through the defenses, or strange changes occurred, causing unrest in the realms. For example, in the mountain and sea realm, there was a demon devil that had been attacked by a group of mortal metamorphosis cultivators when it tried to cross over into the mountain and sea realm. It had originally been dead, but its body exploded into countless chunks of flesh and blood, which scattered throughout the mountains and seas, benefiting countless demons. Only half a year later, quite a few of them crawled out from the depths of the mountains, and then began to fight with the Taoist cultivators who occupied the spirit mountains and blessed lands. The large sects were still able to deal with this, but some of the smaller sects and loose cultivators found it hard to resist. They either suffered great losses or were flattened and destroyed. There were even some transfer formations that had been built long ago that were destroyed. As a result, many territories were cut off from the outside world. Some people complained that if the mountain and sea realms' restrictive spells were still in place, none of this would have happened. The truth was that the restrictive spells had been set up to defend the mountain and sea realm when it was weak. It was impossible to say how much spiritual opportunity and spell formations were used to maintain them, as well as the constant presence of upper realm cultivators. Obviously, it couldn't be maintained for very long. Furthermore, because of the changes in the heavenly workings, even if the spell formation were still there, it would still be a problem. The chaos caused by the outpouring of Bushbeard Heaven's strange power lasted for several years before things gradually settled down. The main reason was that the cultivators were now powerful, and with the four world creators above Yuanzun, they were more than enough to suppress the outsiders. However, there were still some ripples that had yet to subside. Every year or so, they would erupt again, but generally speaking, the situation was under control. As for Zhang Yan, he could sense that as the strange power flowed out, the obstacles in front of him were gone, and the boundless Weili was slowly fusing with him. His consciousness had clearly sunk into the depths of Bushbeard Heaven, and should have been muddle-headed at first, but now it was getting clearer and clearer. That meant that he was becoming more and more compatible with this place. During this process, his consciousness spread out to every corner of Bushbeard Heaven. Although the place was boundless and immeasurable, because of the Weili's resonance, he was getting closer and closer to that place. After an indeterminable amount of time passed, a bright light suddenly appeared in front of him, and he knew that it was the true location of Bushbeard Heaven. Perhaps it didn't originally exist, but almighty soul refinement experts could see what was illusory and what was real. Since he could see it now, it meant that his consciousness could visualize it. Furthermore, if he could do it in Bushbeard Heaven, then it was only natural that it would exist. At this point, he didn't hesitate at all. His consciousness turned and immediately went to merge with it. The next moment, he suddenly opened his eyes, and the universe was reflected in them. A moment later, he slightly lowered his eyes and looked around Bushbeard Heaven. When he saw that it was chaotic everywhere, he raised his sleeves and casually waved his hand. The remaining strange power was dispersed, and everything returned to its original position. At this moment, he had truly grasped this place of creation essence, and he no longer feared the threat of the outside world. He sat silently for a moment, and with a turn of his mind, his consciousness returned to his body. At this moment, he suddenly felt a stagnant pressure wrap around him, as if there was something in the silence that wanted to swallow him. His eyes flashed. In the present world, he had been fighting with that existence in disguise, so he quickly determined that this phenomenon had something to do with it. However, now that he had formed his power, he could hide in Bushbeard Heaven at any time. Even if that existence appeared in front of him now, it wouldn't be able to do anything to him. However, he had promised Xinchang and the others to help them avoid this disaster. Since there was a change in the silence, it was time to bring them here. He looked around and saw Xinchang boy lying on the huge lotus leaf, still sleeping soundly. He smiled and flicked his finger. A ray of light hit the leaf, and the dew on the leaf swayed back and forth. He said, "Friend, you can wake up now." Xinchang boy rubbed his eyes and stood up from the lotus leaf. Zhang Yan said, "There is a change in the outer world. Friend, you can't stay here any longer. You can hide in the place of creation essence behind me." As he spoke, there was a ray of light amidst the millions of lives and deaths behind him. At the same time, there was an infinite spiritual opportunity that came out of it. Xinchang boy seemed to have realized something. He bowed to him with a serious face and walked into the place. At this moment, there were two flows of mana approaching. It was Xinchang and Xia Yuan. The two of them came closer and bowed to him. They wanted to say something, but Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Friends, there is a strange movement outside. Please enter the place of protection first. I will talk to you two after everything is settled." Xinchang and Xia Yuan looked at each other and bowed deeply to him. They then went into Bushbeard Heaven. After the two of them went in, Zhang Yan looked to the other side and said, "Since friend is here, why don't you show yourself?" Taoist Qing Sheng turned around, cupped his fists, and said in a magnanimous manner, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I'm sure fellow Taoist knows my purpose for coming here today." He flipped his hand and took out an item. "I have a fragment of creation essence here. I am willing to give it to you." He could only rely on the fragment of creation essence in his hand. It was not easy to find, and he was not sure if it could move Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan and the Azure Saint did not have much of a relationship. However, the Azure Saint did not do anything unfavorable to him. Instead, he told him what he saw when he passed the test. Although it was a way to make up for what he did not do, at least the estrangement between him and the Azure Saint had been resolved. Putting all these aside, in order to fight against that existence, it would be better to have one more person. He extended his hand and said, "Friend, please." Qing Sheng was relieved. He bowed and said, "Thank you, friend. I will repay you in the future." After bowing, he went into Bushbeard Heaven. At this moment, Zhang Yan felt a surge of mana. He raised his head and saw Quan Dao and Zhu Yu's silhouettes. One of them solemnly bowed and said, "That person's magic power is far greater than ours, and he doesn't want to see us. Fellow Taoist once said that when the time comes, he will give us an accurate answer. I hope fellow Taoist can give us some face in the past and allow me to hide for a while." Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. These two people were clearly not on the same path as him. In the past, they were only seeking more benefits. It was just that they were the same. If they wanted to fight against that existence, they would need more people. Moreover, he was confident that he could control this person, so he wasn't afraid that they would cause any trouble. Thus, He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, there's no need to panic." Quan Dao and Zhai Yuan were overjoyed. Just now, they were smiling. The next moment, they disappeared in front of Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. This situation was extremely sudden. The magical energy of the tempered divinity cultivators clashed with each other. It was impossible for them to leave without leaving any traces. But at this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He lifted his head and looked into the depths of the void. It was as if he could sense a pair of eyes staring at him, but a moment later, they disappeared. His eyes became deeper. He stood there for a moment and waved his sleeves. He turned around and entered Bushbeard Heaven. Chapter 2027. Zhang Yan stepped into Busu Tian. Previously, he had only used his consciousness incarnation to occupy this space, but now that he had entered with his real body, he immediately felt that it was different from before. He felt that with just a thought, he could mobilize the Wei around him at will, as if everything was in the palm of his hand. In this place, there was no one of his generation that could compete with him. As for outsiders, unless they had the ability to destroy this place filled with the essence of creation in one go, they would only be able to enter this place if they obtained his acknowledgement. It was for this reason that Busu Tian could become a place of protection. However, not everything here was perfect. Even though he had become the master of this place of creation essence, he could not peek into all the secrets here. He could only mobilize most of the power here. Due to the limitations of his cultivation, his method of controlling this place was slightly rough. In addition, the backup left by the powerful people in the past had not been completely eliminated. Therefore, in theory, there were still people who could compete with him for the right to control this place, but the possibility was very small. This was because if someone wanted to make things difficult for him, he did not need to fight them directly. He only needed to mobilize the Busu Tian Weili, and he could easily suppress or expel them. There was another thing worth noting. Because he had not found the majority of the Busu Tian's yin energy, this place of essence was actually not complete. Because of this place was not completely without loopholes. There were many gaps, and external forces might be able to invade through these gaps. However, as long as he, as the master, paid attention and cleaned them from time to time, although there were small problems, they would not cause too much harm. At this moment, with a thought, he came in front of Xinchang, Qingsheng, and the others. After entering Busu Tian, these people did not move casually. Obviously, they knew very well who was the master and who was the guest here. Xinchang and Zhai Yuan saw his arrival and came forward to greet him. Xinchang Boy also followed behind and bowed. Xinchang Taoist solemnly thanked him, "I really have to thank you for being able to hide here this time." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The two of you have helped I a lot in the past, so there's no need to be so polite." At this moment, Daoist Qing Sheng took a few steps forward and cupped his fists. Then, he took out the fortune fragment and said, "This is what I promised to give to fellow Daoist. I hope fellow Daoist will accept it." He was different from Xinchang and Zhang Yuan, he did not have any friendship with Zhang Yan, so he could only use this method to subtly express his intention to be subservient. At this moment, Zhang Yan had the entire Busu Tian, so he didn't care about one or two fragments. However, if he didn't accept it, the other party would feel uneasy. He smiled, and his eyes fell. The fragment turned into a ray of light and entered his body. Daoist Qing Sheng's expression relaxed slightly, but he was thinking about how to maintain their relationship. Zhang Yan's gaze moved around, and when he saw that they seemed to be unaware of what had happened outside earlier, he said, "After all of you entered earlier, fellow Daoists Luan Fang and Bing Kong came looking for you as well, and they wanted to enter this place to seek protection." Daoist Xinchang and the others didn't say anything. They didn't see the two of them at the moment, so they guessed that perhaps Zhang Yan didn't let them come in. However, why did he tell them this now? Could it be that he wanted to warn them and let them know who was the master and who was the servant here? Zhang Yan looked at the people in front of him and said slowly, "Although the two of them are not friends with I, we still have some dealings. Moreover, we are still too weak to fight against that existence, so I wanted to let the two of them in." However, before the two of them could enter this place, they disappeared for no reason. I didn't feel anything strange, so I suspected that it was the doing of that existence. He recounted what had just happened. When the others heard it, they all felt a wave of horror in their hearts. Taoist Qing Sheng was shocked, and at the same time, he felt fortunate. Before he entered this place, he was already able to sense that the oppressive feeling was already dense to the extreme, and if he was a step later, then perhaps he would have suffered the same fate as those two people. Taoist Zhang Yuan said in a heavy voice, "So, this existence really showed himself?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Based on the current situation, it seems so. As for what exactly happened, I will try to find out more." Taoist Shinchang thought for a while and said, "After all, the two of them are not weak. Even if that existence's cultivation is extremely high, it shouldn't be so easy to kill him. It is likely that he is temporarily suppressed by the Weili." Qing Sheng shook his head and said, "Even if it is as you said, if he can't escape, it is only a matter of time before he falls into eternal silence. A cultivator of the spirit refinement realm could not be killed and could only be expelled into eternal silence. However, if one party was strong enough to suppress you from beginning to end, the result would not be much different. After all, the almighty cultivators of the spirit refinement realm were all Weili, and as long as they wanted to, they could hold on forever." At this time, Taoist Qing Sheng looked at Zhang Yan and said with a serious expression, "Taoist Xianyuan, if that existence exists outside, it will be difficult for us to have a peaceful day. Even if he can't come in now, he will definitely find a way to break in. We also need to find a way to counterattack, otherwise, we will be too passive." His words were partly out of his own will, and partly out of practical considerations. Although he had now been protected and avoided a crisis, he was actually living under someone else's roof. As a Grand Supreme of the Spirit Refinement Realm, he wanted to be free and unrestrained, so he did not want to keep hiding like this. Taoist Zhang Yuan thought for a while and also said, "What Taoist Qing Sheng said is not unreasonable. It is good to live in a place of protection, but that existence will definitely find a way to break in, so we can't just stay here and defend." Zhang Yan thought for a while. Although such a thing was not likely to happen now, nothing was absolute in the world. It was right to prepare for a rainy day, and counterattack was also necessary. He did not want to be trapped here forever. Moreover, there was another important reason that forced them to react. That being had appeared to invade and destroy everything. Therefore, with every deity refinement cultivator that died, its power would grow by a bit. If the two of them were really trapped by that being, even if it was to prevent the being's power from growing, they had to find a way to help them escape. Even if it was up to him to end things, he could not allow them to fall into the hands of that being. However, they still knew nothing about it, and there was a big gap between their cultivation, so they could not be rash. Thinking of this, he said, "Bu Su Tian is vast and boundless. Fellow Taoists, since you have come here, please choose a place to stay. After the arrangements are made, we will talk again in detail." Taoist Shinchang cupped his hands and said, "If that is the case, then I will disturb fellow Taoist." He turned around and discussed with Taoist Zhang Yuan for a while, then they went their separate ways. Taoist Qing Sheng's thoughts changed. In his mind, the meaning behind Shinchang's words was that they should not wander around randomly, and should only stay in one place. He did not have any objection to this. When guests came to the host's place, the guest could only follow the host's wishes. If he was the ruler of this place, he would do the same. Therefore, he cupped his hands and said that he had disturbed them, then waved his sleeves and left to find a place to stay. Shinchang Boy bit his finger and lowered his head to think for a moment. Then, he looked up and said, "This place is quite good." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "In that case, fellow Taoist can stay here." Shinchang Boy nodded. A lotus branch emerged behind him and turned into a big leaf. He then sat down on it and fell into a deep sleep after a while. Zhang Yan stood in the same place and waited for a while. In his senses, Shinchang, Zhang Yuan, Qing Sheng, and the others each stayed in a place. Then, their qi activity stopped there. It was as if several floating islands had appeared in the boundless ocean. The moment he stopped, the world of reality appeared behind him. The reason for this was that they were forced to do so by that existence. Because people had the ability to invade and destroy everything, once all the realms disappeared from the void, as long as they left Busu Tian, even if they didn't fight with others, they would still fall into eternal silence. Therefore, it was necessary to leave behind an immortal realm. Before this, Zhang Yan had set up a layer of protection so that this existence could not see the Kunshur continent and could not sense the existence of the other heavens. Of course, logically speaking, the people in the lower realms were the changes in the world. For spirit refinement cultivators, they were too insignificant and not worthy of their attention. Even if they saw the cultivators of the other heavens, they would most likely not take them seriously. But because of this, just now, they needed to be separated to avoid being inadvertently harmed. At this time, seeing that there was nothing to do for the time being, he once again sent a part of his consciousness into Xianyuan heaven. Before that existence had arrived, the stimulation of qi activity had already caused a lot of chaos in Busu Tian. Now that it seemed to have appeared, and there were still many loopholes in Busu Tian, it was very likely that it would be invaded by its Weili and cause more trouble. Therefore, he needed to take some necessary precautions. He summoned the disciples who were still stationed in Qinghuan Palace and gave them some instructions. Then, he sent a message to the 4 Yuanzun cultivators and the other sects of the heavens, telling them to stay vigilant and defend against foreign enemies. In addition, there were 2 other things that were very important. The first was to continue to improve his cultivation. Controlling Busu Tian was not only to control this place, but also a process of seeking the Tao. Just now, he occupied this place, and the benefits were not immediately apparent. They could only be seen as his cultivation increased. The only regret was that because he and a group of spirit refinement cultivators had hidden in this place, the Void Revolution and Busu Tian's evolution were already similar, so he did not have much of an advantage over that existence. Another thing was that if he wanted to exert strength outside, he needed to consolidate his foundation. If the interior was not stable, he could not concentrate his strength. First, he had to sort out the interior of Busu Tian. He had to find a way to find the missing yin qi and fill in the loopholes. Then, he had to find a way to integrate the elusive chaos heaven into Busu. He had no clue about the former, but he could find a way to solve the latter first. He immediately looked at the location of the chaos heaven. Before he controlled Busu Tian, it had rushed over here as if it wanted to fight with him. But now, its momentum had slowed down, but from the looks of it, it was about to arrive. After waiting patiently in the palace for 2 years, the chaos heaven finally descended. At the moment it connected with Busu Tian, he guided it with his mind, and the door opened in front of him. His deep and serene eyes looked into the room for a moment, then he shook his sleeves, slowly stood up, and stepped inside. Chapter 2028. The sky was clear, and the waves were as calm as a mirror. The birds' cries came from far away, and then gradually faded away. On the boat, an old man wearing a straw raincoat was fishing on the river. Beside him, a strong and dignified child was squatting there, watching with wide eyes. The old man suddenly felt the rod sink, and knew that a fish had taken the bait. He hurriedly exerted force, and the child also came to help. After the boat swayed for a while, a white-bellied, silver-scaled fish was caught. The old man removed the hook and put the fish into the basket. He then rubbed the child's head, and said with narrowed eyes, "Good grandson, good grandson." At this time, the child pointed into the distance and asked curiously, "Grandpa, what is that?" The old man turned around and saw the shadow of a towering mountain in the distance. The hazy greenish-gray color seemed to occupy half the sky, but just now, he clearly didn't see it. He wasn't too surprised. Instead, his murky eyes revealed a look of reminiscence, and he said with a sigh, "This is the immortal mountain. Past it is the place where the immortals live. When I was young, I came here with my fellow villagers to fish, and I was fortunate enough to see it a few times. At this time, the originally calm river water suddenly surged, and the water splashed continuously as if it was boiling. The child seemed to hear something again, and he looked up at the sky, and said innocently, "Grandpa, there are so many big birds." The old man was startled, and he looked up. He saw waves of air rolling through the sky, and with a rumbling sound, they went straight in the direction of the immortal mountain. His expression changed, and he hugged the child, protecting him in his arms. He had seen this kind of situation in the past. It was said that when the immortals passed by, they would cause great winds and waves, and even thunder and rain, but it was extremely rare. But this time, it happened one after another. In just a short period of time, there were several waves of sound, and it caused the water of the river to sway. When everything quieted down, the old man didn't dare to stay here any longer, and he hurriedly rode away. At this time, the passing waves of air in the sky all went toward the opposite immortal mountain. One of them passed through the veil like fog, and suddenly there was a burst of light in front of him. He saw countless flying mountains floating and falling, and thousands of palaces standing here. Under the illumination of the sun, the glazed tiles were suffused with golden light. The Milky Way waterfall floated in the air and surrounded the four directions. The splashing jade beads and crystal water formed a bright rainbow bridge. At this time, the waves of air dissipated, and several Taoists appeared. One of them gave an order, and then he landed alone in front of a golden palace. After reporting in front of the hall, he was led to a large tower, where a tall and handsome young Taoist stood with his hands behind his back. He didn't dare to look at the ever-changing vision behind him, so he bowed his head and said respectfully, "Tao Master Miao Yu." "Tao Tao Miao Yu Tao." Tao Master Mist Jade looked over and said, "There are hundreds of sects in the four chaotic domains. You are the first to arrive." The cultivator said seriously, "Since it's Tao Master's order, how can the Jing Liang branch dare to delay?" Tao Master Miao Yu's voice was a bit gentle, "We're all from the same sect, so there's no need to pay too much attention to etiquette. Go down and wait first." The cultivator bowed, and an attendant came up to lead him out. After this person left, Tao Master Miao Yu came down to meet more than a dozen sect masters from the other chaos realms. When no one came for a while, his eyes moved slightly, and a shadow walked out of his body. After just a few steps, he came to an unfathomable place. There was only a jade palace floating here. He walked slowly to the steps and asked, "Is Senior Brother here?" A woman appeared above the jade palace gate, and she bowed and said, Tao Master Luo Zhan is in the Mi Palace worshipping the Patriarch. Please wait for a moment." When Tao Master Miao Yu heard the mention of the Patriarch, his expression became solemn, and he said, "Then I'll wait here." After a long time, the jade gate opened, and the golden pillar moved. A black-haired, long-bearded, middle-aged Taoist walked out. He was full of green light, and his aura was magnificent. However, there seemed to be an invisible whirlpool behind him that swallowed up all the light and color. Tao Master Miao Yu came up and bowed, "Greetings, Senior Brother," and then asked, "Did teacher respond?" Tao Master Luo Zhan shook his head and sighed, "It's still the same as before, no response." He stroked his beard and said decisively, "If that's the case, then we'll still act according to teacher's order before he left, and strive to not make any mistakes." Tao Master Miao Yu's expression was slightly solemn. "Will the trial of leaving the void still come?" Tao Master Luo Zhan said, "Junior Brother, don't worry. According to the order, as long as our junior brother arrives, he will rule the chaotic domain and control the place of creation from afar. Then, everything will be fine." Tao Master Miao Yu nodded. According to the edict, this junior brother was the last disciple of the Patriarch and was the only person who could become a spirit refinement cultivator. If they could get him, with his ability, all kinds of dangers could be resolved. Tao Master Luo Zhan asked, "Has Qin Jiliang arrived?" The world behind Qinsong is especially important, and it involves the place of creation, so they can't be left out. Tao Master Miao Yu said, "The chaotic domain where he lives isn't the upper class, so he will always be delayed when he comes to my place." Tao Master Luo Zhan grunted. Tao Master Miao Yu said, "Senior Brother, his cultivation is weak, and he can only be considered the bottom among the various branches. It doesn't matter whether he comes or not. Tao Master Luo Zhan said, even so, we can let them be in the past. However, the place where the chaotic domain colludes with is related to the order, so we can't do without them. Tao Master Miaoyu said, then I will send someone to urge them later. Tao Master Luo Zhan said, there's no need for that. They don't dare to go against the order, so we can just wait here. Above the tall mountain, another wave of air rolled past, and after it landed, a clear body of Daoren was revealed. His eyes were filled with interest, and behind him was a young Taoist who looked 17 or 18 years old. However, just as the two of them came to the front of the Golden Gate, a clear light flashed, and a burly Taoist appeared. He looked down at Daoren with his hands behind his back, and said with a mocking tone, Chen Jilyang, why, are you still here this time? Is there no one in your Qinsang branch, and only you, the servant boy, are called here? Chen Jilyang heard this, but he was not angry. He laughed and said, so it is Dawi Shangzhen. This old man is clumsy, but thanks to the ancestral master, I am a sect master, but I have not made many contributions. Now that I am here as an errand boy, I am making the best use of my abilities. Dawe saw that Chen Jilyang mentioned the ancestral master, so he snorted and did not dare to say anything more, afraid that he would violate the taboo. Moreover, although Chen Jilyang was not the ancestral master's disciple, in terms of seniority, he was far ahead of him, and was on the same level as the Tao masters. Dawe did not dare to cross the line, so he glared at Chen Jilyang and left. The young Taoist spoke with his divine will, Uncle Master, this Dawe sect master is a perfected master, but why does he not speak like a Taoist cultivator? Chen Jilyang said, that's not the case. His Yanghong branch is very particular about being straightforward, and it would be strange if he did not act like this. You see, he does not say anything in the past, and only suppresses it in his heart. Now that the Qinsang branch is going to be useless, he can't help but vent it out. The young Taoist said, are we really going to act according to the edict? But Uncle Master didn't say that he had never heard about this from the ancestral master. Moreover, even if there is such an edict, it is for the Qingchen branch, what does it have to do with the Qinsang branch? Chen Jilyang shook his head and led the young Taoist to their temporary lodging. Along the way, they bumped into other Taoists from time to time, and they greeted each other with cupped fists. However, Chen Jilyang could feel that everyone's attitude towards him had changed as the matter was about to happen. The young Taoist noticed it too, and he said angrily, it's a pity that the Qinsang branch lacks mystic stones, and it's hard for us to cross that hurdle. Until now, there is no Tao Master Zhen Yang, or else this person would not be so rude. Back then, when the great underworld ancestral master established the chaotic domain, there were one or several branches that were passed down in each chaotic domain. In addition to the disciples of the ancestral master, there were hundreds of them. However, there were only 10 or so direct disciples of the ancestral master, and they were all led by the three orthodox sections. In fact, in terms of background, the Qinsang school was also a righteous sect, and they also had a chaotic domain behind them. However, until now, there was not a Tao Master Zhen Yang in the school, so they could not speak, and because of this, they were even faintly ostracized by some sections. Not long after Chen Jilyang entered the palace, a messenger came and said, Shangzhen Chen, Tao Master Miaoyu knows that you are here, and he invites you over for a chat. Chen Jilyang's expression turned serious, and he said, Daoren will go now, please allow me to talk to Martial Nephew first. He walked to the side and said to the young Taoist, Martial Nephew Qiao, today is different from the past. Tao Master Ji Chang is not here, Tao Master Miao Yu and Tao Master Luo Zhan do not like us, and they may find an excuse to find fault with me. If you encounter any problems, remember to be patient, and if there are any grievances, wait for me to come back. The young Taoist raised his hand and solemnly replied, Martial Uncle, don't worry, I know the severity. Chen Jilyang patted him and followed the messenger. After a while, the two of them came into the Golden Palace, and saw Tao Master Miaoyu sitting on the high platform. He came up and bowed, and said, Tao Master, greetings. Tao Master Miaoyu looked down and said, Chen Jilyang, do do you know why I called you here? Even in the face of the younger generation, because they were of the same lineage, he usually did not call them by their names. However, although Qin Jiliang was also the head of the Qinsang lineage, in his eyes, he was just a boy beside the ancestral master, and could not be compared to the direct disciples, so his tone was not polite. Qin Jiliang did not care at all, and said, Daoren does not understand, please enlighten me. Dao Master Miaoyu said, you should also know about the matter of the edict. Soon, the chaotic domain behind Qinsang will be connected to the place of fortune. This is the place where the ancestral master passed down the lineage, and it will be of great use to us, so we need your cooperation. Chen Jiliang bowed slightly and sighed. Dao Master also knows that after the 5 generations of the head of the Qinsang, no one has ascended to the upper domain. The talisman of the ancestral master has also dimmed, and it is obvious that the world behind it has been extinguished, and all the techniques have been used up. I'm afraid there is no inheritance, and it can no longer be connected to the upper and lower domain. Dao Master Miaoyu said expressionlessly, how can I not know about this? It's just that you all ascended to the upper domain from that world. As long as you all are still here, follow this cause and effect, and you will eventually find the place of fortune. It doesn't matter if you can't do it, I will do it for you. Chen Jiliang's heart sank slightly, and he was about to say something, but Dao Master Miaoyu did not give him the chance to speak. He waved his sleeves and said, well, it's settled, go back and wait for the news. Chapter 2029. Chen Jiliang walked out of the Golden Palace. He had long known that the 2 Dao Masters had always been staring at the land of fortune behind the Black Tsang lineage. It was just that Dao Master Chang Ji had protected them in the past and it was not a critical moment, so they had never forced them. This time, it seemed that the 2 did not want to wait any longer. He did not know much about the edict, but if it was really the Patriarch's edict, why didn't he take it out and read it? If it was legitimate, then they would obey. Perhaps it was as martial nephew Qiao said, even if there was such an edict, it was for the Qingchen bloodline and not to control them. This was clearly using the Patriarch's name to embezzle the benefits of the Qinsang bloodline. If this was really the case, it was very likely that even the chaotic domain and the world behind it would be invaded. The Qinsang bloodline would no longer be able to act independently and could only be reduced to the same level as those small sects, subjugating others in disguise. This was absolutely unacceptable to him. He sighed in his heart. The cultivators of the Qinsang bloodline were weaker than others at the moment, not because of their lack of cultivation, but because they lacked the black stone. It was difficult for them to cross that threshold. This could not be helped. Even the 3 Dao Masters above could not have achieved what they had today if they did not have the black stone. However, from the secret slip left behind by the ancestral master, there was indeed a profound stone in the lower realms. They had already roughly deduced its approximate location, but the problem was that they were currently unable to take even half a step out of the celestial world. The chaotic domain was sometimes separated from the world they came from, and sometimes they were close. Only when the 2 worlds were connected could they return to where they came from. However, the Qinsang bloodline had only been passed down for a few generations. Ever since he ascended, the chaotic domain had always been close to the land of creation and had not reached it until now. Now that the door was about to open, he did not expect to be targeted by the 2 Dao Masters at this time. Even though he was worried, he did not show it on his face. On the way back, he greeted the people he knew and returned to the temporary accommodation. The young Taoist came up and bowed, "Martial uncle." Chen Jiliang asked, "Did anything happen after I left?" The young Taoist said, "No one came." Chen Jiliang stroked his beard and said, "None of the clans that were on good terms in the past came?" The young Taoist replied, "No." Chen Jiliang said, "Guard the palace gate for me, I have something to say to your Shifu." The young Taoist bowed. "Yes, Uncle Master." Chen Jiliang took out a ring from his sleeve and poured his mana into it. In the light, a blurry figure of a Taoist appeared. When he saw Chen Jiliang, he said, "Senior brother Chen, did my 2 senior brothers make things difficult for you?" Chen Jiliang sighed and said, "It's fine if he only wants to make things difficult for me, but this time, he clearly said that he wants me to help him obtain the land of fortune." The Taoist didn't seem to panic at all. His voice was still calm as he said, "So, they have made up their minds." Chen Jiliang nodded heavily. The Taoist said, "We are not at the end of the line yet. Senior brother Sun Yu left a talisman in the past. If we encounter any trouble, we can look for him. I originally didn't want to trouble him too much, but at this time, for the matter of the sect, I have no choice but to ask for his help." Chen Jiliang said, "Since junior brother can call upon Lord Ji Chang, then this matter can be slightly eased, but," the Taoist said, "but this method can only delay for a while. If the tribulation of void separation is real, then my two senior brothers will continue to target my Qinsang school. Therefore, we still need to think of a way ourselves. After the two realms are connected, I will personally go down to the lower realm and hope to be able to find that profound stone." Chen Jiliang sighed and said, "It's difficult. Even if we can delay it until the two realms are connected, junior brother can't find the profound stone in a hurry. Moreover, the two Taoists probably won't give us this chance." The Taoist said firmly, "Even if there is a slight possibility, we have to try." Chen Jiliang thought for a while and nodded, "All right, I don't know how the sect is doing in the lower realm now. Junior brother can go and take a look." The Taoist said, "In the past, I heard from Qingang that he has a disciple who has a vision and talent that is 100 times better than him. If he controls the sect, he will definitely be able to bring glory to Qinsang. If I can't achieve it, I can still entrust this thing to him after I find it, so that my Qinsang branch won't decline in my hands." At this moment, in the Taoist palace not far away, Dawei Zhenren's burly body sat on a stone chair. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, a disciple walked over and looked up, asking in a deep voice, "How is it?" The disciple bowed and said, "Master, when Daoren Chen came out, he didn't show any expression and I couldn't see anything. However, I have inquired about it. The two Taoists have already ordered him to act according to the orders. So, it seems that the chaotic domain that they are at will be taken away." Dawei Zhenren became spirited and said, "Good." He stood up, took 2 steps and said with a smile, "Good. In the past, Qinsang school relied on occupying a piece of chaotic domain to show that they are superior to me. When they lose their foothold, let's see if they can still be as arrogant as before." It was not that he coveted the chaotic domain because he knew very well that even if it was really taken away, he would not have a share. He just simply disliked Qinsang school. Among the hundreds of sects, some were inherited by the disciples of Taiming Patriarch, and some were inherited by the Patriarch. However, no matter which branch it was, if there was no Taoist master in charge, almost all of them would look for the 3 orthodox sects to attach themselves to, which was the case with the Great Ocean sect. However, the Dark Azure sect had always been righteous and had never submitted to any great sect. Moreover, they occupied a vast expanse of chaotic domain all by themselves. This made Dawei Zhenren very dissatisfied. Originally, without the true Yang, everyone should have been in the same place as the light. Why was he an exception? If it was other sects, even if they didn't like him or were secretly dissatisfied with him, they would still maintain a friendly attitude on the surface. However, the Great Ocean sect needed to be straightforward. The more they followed their heart, the smoother their cultivation. Therefore, he never concealed his dislike for Qinsang school. He sat back on the stone chair and sneered, with the 2 Taoists arranging things, "I think in a few days, we will be able to visit the chaotic domain of Qinsang school." On the other side, Tao Master Miaoyu came to the Jade Palace and saw Tao Master Luo Zhan. He said, "Senior brother, I have seen Chen Jiliang and told him what should be said." Tao Master Luo Zhan nodded. The Yutsang sect had never been servile or overbearing towards them, and they did not follow their orders like the other sections. Even so, he did not feel averse towards them. Instead, he admired their ambition and would usually give them some respect. However, whether or not this would cause his sect to treat the Yutsang sect with more hostility was out of his control. But no matter what, only Tao Master Zhenyang had the right to speak. Therefore, he didn't ask Chen Jiliang if he agreed to this matter. Because in this matter, the attitude of Qinsang's school didn't matter at all. He said in a deep voice, that Yuan Zhongzi is our junior brother after all. Don't embarrass him too much. If we can successfully occupy the place of creation, we can also leave the chaotic domain for him. Do you two still remember that he is from the same sect? As this voice came out, the two suddenly found a tall Daoist standing in front of the steps. Dao Master Luo Zhang quickly stood up and bowed respectfully. He said, "Senior brother, you have come out of seclusion." Daoist Sun Yu said calmly, "If I didn't come out, what were you going to do? Plot against your fellow sect members?" Dao Master Miao Yu hurriedly explained, "Senior brother, you have wronged us. We are acting according to Master's orders. Moreover, we are not acting out of selfishness. We are also thinking about the sect passed down by the ancestral master. If we don't have that place of creation, we won't be able to protect the sky leaving tribulation." Daoist Sun Yu looked at him and said, "The imperial edict only said that the place of creation can be used as shelter. When did it say that we can't avoid it if we don't have that place? Could it be that the place behind us is not the place of creation?" Dao Master Miao Yu said, "But senior brother, according to the imperial edict, the place behind us is not as good as that place." Daoist Sun Yu said, "If that is the case, then we might as well invite junior brother Yuan Zhongzi to come here and let him know about the imperial edict. If he invites us to avoid the tribulation, we will gladly go. If he doesn't mention it, then we will find our own way. There is no need to do such a shameful thing." Dao Master Miao Yu immediately fell silent. Now, they could use the imperial edict as an excuse to threaten Qinsong. But if they showed it to him, how could they obediently obey their arrangements? Even if they could forcefully suppress it, it would be too unsightly. Daoist Sun Yu saw that they were all silent, and his tone softened a little. "Two junior brothers, the chaotic domain and the thing behind it are the opportunity that Master left for Qinsong, and it is also junior brother Yuan Zhongzi's opportunity. As senior brother, how can you and I, instead of protecting it, covet junior brother's things? We can't do this. Think about it carefully later." As he spoke, his figure flickered and disappeared. Dao Master Miao Yu turned his head and said, "Senior brother." Dao Master Luo Zhan remained silent. Dao Master Miao Yu said, "Senior brother Sun Yu only came with an incarnation. He is still in the closed door. If we wait now..." Dao Master Luo Zhan shook his head and said helplessly, "But since senior brother has already spoken, how can we refuse him? If we quarrel among ourselves, it will be a joke to others. Let's leave it at that for now." Even though Sun Yu only came with an incarnation this time, he had already made his attitude clear. If the three of them had a disagreement, the people below would not know what to do. At this moment, a woman's figure appeared above the palace gate. She bowed and said, "Dao Master, there's movement on the altar." When Dao Master Miao Yu heard this, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Senior brother, could it be?" Daoist Luo Zhan stretched out his hand to stop him from continuing. He said, "I'll go take a look. Junior brother, wait for me here." Dao Master Miao Yu agreed. Dao Master Luo Zhan's figure flickered and disappeared. After a long time, he turned back. However, the expression on his face was very different from before. He said slowly, "Junior brother, there's news about the last disciple of the patriarch." Dao Master Miao Yu was slightly surprised and said, "Oh? What news?" Dao Master Luo Zhan smiled and said, "Our little junior brother has already achieved the spirit refinement Dao fruit not long ago. It's just that he is still in seclusion. Just now, he has passed his will to me. As long as my chaotic domain connects to his place, he can come over. If he comes, he will naturally be in charge of the creation heavens. I believe senior brother Sun Yu will have nothing to say at that time." Chapter 2030. The lineages passed down by the great underworld patriarch, as well as the sects established by some disciples, were mostly located in the four great chaotic domains. Each chaotic domain was connected to a modern world. Therefore, the four great sects, including the Qinsang school, actually originated from different modern worlds. However, because the great underworld patriarch Whaley could travel between the chaotic domains, it protected them, but it also prevented them from leaving. In fact, under normal circumstances, there was no need for this. The chaotic domain was vast and boundless, and there were no external disturbances. On the surface, there was no need to ask about other places. But after all, this was not a true place of fortune. Although cultivators had all the external medicines for ordinary cultivation, there was a lack of external medicines to reach the upper realm. Fortunately, the chaotic domain was not completely closed off. On the day when it was connected to the modern world, it would naturally be connected to other realms. Luo Zhan and Miao Yu had been waiting for this moment since they received the news that day. More than 10 days passed in a flash. In the two's perception, the world around them suddenly extended, as if it had expanded thousands of times in an instant. How could they not know that the chaotic domain's gateway was finally connected to the world behind it? With a thought, the two of them arrived before an altar that occupied a vast area. They could see that there was already a light screen floating in the air above the altar. Unlike the Qinsang school, they had previously had the experience of traveling with the modern world behind it. Therefore, they had built this altar long ago. Every time the two realms were connected, this gateway would automatically open. Originally, after the light curtain opened, it would only maintain its original state, but now it was getting brighter and brighter. Wisps of qi overflowed from it, stirring the wind and clouds in the chaotic domain. For some reason, the brilliance on it seemed to be distorted at this moment. The two of them had already realized what was about to happen. Although they looked normal on the surface and were still standing steadily, it seemed that no matter how intense the changes were, they would not be able to shake their state of mind. However, in the depths of their eyes, there was clearly a trace of admiration and respect. After a short moment, the light abruptly collapsed inward, forming a vortex. A dazzling rainbow appeared out of thin air, descending upon the altar before spreading in all directions. When the light slowly dispersed, a purple-robed young Taoist who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old could be seen standing there. His long eyebrows were raised, and his eyes were bright. The patterns on his clothes had waves, the sun, the moon, and the land. However, at a glance, these were not decorations. They really did exist, as if the various worlds were accompanying him. After Luo Zhan and Miao Yu sensed this person's qi activity, they couldn't help but stagnate, and even their minds trembled. This was the innate reverence they had towards the Whaley. This was the first time they had felt the pressure of the upper realm. Ever since they had reached the true yang stage, they had never felt so weak. It was as if they were incomparably small in front of this person, like ants. For a moment, they were unable to speak. After a while, the qi activity seemed to be restrained by the other party, and finally disappeared. Just now, the two of them had broken free from the heavy pressure. They stepped forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Grand Elder." The young Taoist looked down and said, "Senior brothers, you're too polite. We're all from the same sect, there's no need to be so polite." Luo Zhan and Miao Yu could feel that although the other party's words were polite, there was actually a sense of indifference and alienation, and he didn't seem to have any intention of correcting the way they addressed him. This was normal. Other than being from the same sect, there was actually no friendship between them. However, this was enough. According to the edict, the other party would naturally help them avoid the calamity of leaving the sky. Dao Master Luo Zhan bowed again and said, "Grand Elder, please bestow your Dao name, so that we can announce it to all the sections." If the Grand Elder went to a place, if he was willing, then the living beings in that place would know his name and worship him. However, Hun Tian was different, because this place was created by the great underworld patriarch, and there was a Whaley left behind by him, so other people's Whaley couldn't make it public. Just like the three true yang cultivators here, they originally had the ability to use things to benefit themselves, but in this place, they couldn't make anyone follow their own will. The young Taoist said, "My Dao name is Xian Che. Senior brothers, please remember it." Luo Zhan and Miao Yu bowed again. Taoist Xian Che didn't have the intention to talk about their friendship, and directly asked, "How's the preparation for the land of creation?" Dao Master Miaoyu said, "That place has always been in the hands of teacher's sect. Now that we've already informed them, it shouldn't affect the Grand Elder's plan." Daoist Xian Che said, "This is teacher's order, it's not my personal matter. The calamity of leaving the sky this time is very important, and only the land of creation can protect it. Not only is it related to senior brothers, but it is also related to the inheritance of teacher's various sections. There can't be any mistakes, and I believe that senior brothers will be able to arrange it properly." Dao Master Luo Zhan said, "Don't worry, Grand Elder, there won't be any mistakes." Daoist Xian Che said good, and his gaze swept across, saying, "I remember there's still senior brother Sun Yu. Where is he? Why didn't he come to see me?" Dao Master Miaoyu replied, "Senior brother Sun Yu is in seclusion, so it's difficult for him to welcome Grand Elder. If Grand Elder wants to see him, we can invite him over." Dao Master Luo Zhan frowned slightly, but he didn't say anything. Daoist Xian Che waved his sleeve, and said expressionlessly, "Then let him go into seclusion, there's no need to summon him, after all, cultivation is more important." Dao Master Luo Zhan sighed in his heart and cupped his hands, saying, "Grand Elder, the various sects that teacher has passed down are all here now, and there are a few of them who are our fellow disciples. Grand Elder, do you want to meet them?" Daoist Xian Che looked at him, and said indifferently, "All right." Luo Zhan and Miaoyu left, and at the same time, they sent a message to the sect masters of the various sects, saying that a disciple of the ancestral master had reached the spirit refinement realm, and now that he had come to this chaotic domain, the calamity of leaving the sky mentioned in the message should not be difficult to resolve, and they wanted them to come and pay their respects. Chen Jiliang also heard about this very quickly, and his heart sank. Originally, with Daoist Master Sun Yu coming to mediate, he thought that this matter could be delayed, and that the Qinsang sect still had time to make arrangements. But he never expected that the spirit refinement realm's Grand Elder would actually come. Although he didn't know how powerful this expert was, he knew that in front of such a great wali, all schemes were useless. This time, even Daoist Master Sun Yu couldn't help them. However, he still had to inform the sect about this matter, and he took out the silver ring, and activated it again, and then realized that no matter how much magic energy he poured into it, there was no reaction. Immediately, he knew that the two Dao masters must have concealed the heavenly secret, and they obviously didn't want to give Qinsang any chance. At this time, the young Daoist walked in, and said, "Martial uncle, Dawei Shengzhen wants to see you." Chen Jiliang snorted, and said, "He's here to see Qinsang sect become a joke." The young Daoist said, "Then disciple will ask him to leave." Chen Jiliang waved his hand, and said, "There's no need, go and invite him in. No matter what happens to him, we will naturally uphold the righteous path." After a while, Dawei Shengzhen walked in, and said, "Chen Jiliang, the Grand Elder has arrived, why don't you go and pay your respects?" Chen Jiliang was surprised, and said, "Dawei Shengzhen, don't you know that I'm just a child who serves the ancestral master, how can I mingle with all of you? Wouldn't this stain the Grand Elder's eyes and ears?" Dawei Shengzhen snorted, and said, "You're smart, but once the Grand Elder is here, I'm afraid your Qinsang sect will end here, right?" Chen Jiliang, however, didn't get angry, and said while stroking his beard, "The changes of the world, even the almighties of the upper realm can't know everything, who knows what will happen?" Dawei Shengzhen sneered, he thought that Chen Jiliang was just being stubborn, and thought to himself, "Let's see if you can still be so stubborn in the future." The chaotic void domain was the place where the previous Taoists of Qinsang school lived. It could be seen that the scenery here was very similar to the layout of the sect that Grandmaster Tai Ming personally set up in the 9 continents. The third-generation sect master Yuan Zhongzi was sitting cross-legged on a celestial palace, and he was staring at a dark sundial in front of him. According to his previous calculations, in at most 2 to 3 days, the chaotic void domain would connect with the place of creation, and then he would be able to borrow the portal between the 2 realms to go to the realm above. Now that there was no movement in the outer realm, it seemed that Sun Yu's appearance played a role, but he had a bad feeling in his heart, but he didn't know where it came from. His expression was solemn, and he thought, "Seems like I have to act in advance. Now, Although the chaotic void domain had not completely connected with the place of creation, he had a fairy passed down by the Grandmaster with him. With this item, before the two realms were truly connected, he could cross the portal in advance and reach that place. However, this was extremely dangerous, because this fairy was originally used in times of crisis. If something went wrong, he would be lost in the void realm, and maybe he would be trapped in it forever. However, in order to prevent the Qinsang school from being manipulated by others, he had to take this risk. Moreover, he used his mana to calculate, and he felt that there was a chance of survival in the path ahead of Qinsang school, and there was a high possibility of success. After making the decision, he waved his sleeve and left a letter, stating his destination. The reason why he didn't say it was to guard against Luo Zhan and Miao Yu, lest they sensed it. He waved his sleeve and was about to summon the flying fairy, but at this moment, his movement stopped. He turned his head and saw a Taoist with black hair and a long beard standing there. He bowed and said, "I didn't know that senior brother was here, junior brother greets you." Dao Venerable Luo Zhan said in a deep voice, "Junior brother, where are you going?" Yuan Zhongzi sighed softly and said, "Senior brother, why do you ask when you already know the answer?" Dao Venerable Luo Zhan took a few steps forward and said, "Junior brother, just now, teacher's last disciple has arrived from beyond the heavens." He paused and said in a serious tone, "This junior brother of ours is extremely talented, and he has already achieved the spirit cultivation Dao fruit." Yuan Zhongzi's expression was calm, and he nodded and said, "The two senior brothers have always valued senior brother Sun Yu's words. If not, why would senior brother come personally? In this case, my Qinsang school has no other choice." Dao Venerable Luo Zhan looked at him and said, "Junior brother, it's good that you can understand. That place of fortune is of great importance, and it is beneficial to all the schools that teacher has passed down. You, Qinsang, hand over this place, and many of your fellow disciples will naturally owe you a favor. When little junior brother arrives, I don't need you to do anything to Qinsang, I just need to sit at the side and watch. I hope that you and the others will behave yourselves, and we won't lose our friendship as fellow disciples." After saying that, his entire body turned into specks of light and disappeared. Yuan Zhongzi looked around and found that he was trapped here, and he couldn't get out. He pondered for a moment and walked to the side of the table. His gaze fell on the pool that resembled the great pool of Dragon Abyss. He pondered and said, "Since the survival of my Yutsang sect isn't in my place, where should it be?" Chapter 2031. Outside the pavilion where Yuan Zhongzi resided, a few Qingchen sect disciples were waiting outside. When they saw Dao Venerable Luo Zhan walking out on a cloud, they came up and bowed, saying, "Dao Venerable." Dao Master Luo Zhan looked down at the Qinsang branch's encampment and said, "Go." The disciples bowed and immediately flew in different directions. Then, they spread out the decrees and read them out loud. The Dao Master has decreed that the Grand Supreme will visit the chaotic void realm in the next few days. All Qinsang school disciples are to stay in their positions and are not to be summoned. Do not take half a step outside the sect without permission, lest you offend the carriage. The Dao Master's words were law. Aside from the spiritual masters who ascended from the Qinsang branch, there were also disciples who joined the sect later. There were also some powerful cultivators who had severed their mortal bodies. But when they heard the decree, they immediately felt that they couldn't go anywhere else. Their activities were restricted to their own cave abodes. Some elders tried to activate the restrictions to escape, but found that it was useless. Not to mention the cave abode's restrictions, even the Qinsang branch's protective formation was useless to a true yang cultivator. He could destroy it with a single thought. Ever since the Qinsang school established itself in the chaotic void realm, it was the first time they were bullied like this. But the other party was a true yang Dao master. His magic power wasn't something they could resist. Not only that, but the Grand Supreme Dao ancestor was also involved. The powerful cultivators in the sect all knew how powerful he was, so they could only remain silent. Some disciples were furious, but they couldn't resist. Dao Master Luo Zhan looked at this scene expressionlessly. Originally, they needed the people from the Qinsang school, especially the mortal metamorphosis cultivators who ascended to the higher realms. Only then could they follow the karma and find the land of fortune behind them. But now that there was a spirit refinement cultivator like Taoist Xian Che, there was naturally no need to do so. It didn't matter if the people from the Qinsang school were there or not. Now that he didn't want them to come out and get in the way, it was fine as long as they didn't come out and get in the way. With a thought, he brought his disciples back to the clear sink chaotic realm. He ordered the disciples to disperse and went to the Golden Palace. Miaoyu Dao Master was in front of the steps of the Golden Palace at the moment. Seeing him return, he came up and bowed, asking, "Senior brother, how is it?" Dao Venerate Luo Zhan said, "Junior brother Yuan Zhongzi has been imprisoned in my residence. Until this matter is resolved, he won't come and disturb us anymore." Dao Master Miaoyu said, "That's good. We are doing this for the sake of the others, lest they anger the Grand Supreme on impulse. At that time, they will understand our good intentions." Dao Lord Luo Zhan looked at him, but didn't reply. No matter what, their goal all this while had been to snatch the land of fortune in the hands of the Qinsang bloodline. They could make such pompous claims to the outside world, but both of them knew exactly what was going on here, so there was no need to say such things. He asked, "Is the Grand Supreme here?" Dao Master Miaoyu said, "He is still in the Golden Palace. I will go with senior brother to meet him." Dao Master Luo Zhan grunted, then went to the palace with Dao Master Miaoyu. When they arrived at the hall, they bowed and said, "Greetings, Grand Supreme." Daoist Xian Che had stayed in the Golden Palace for several days and had seen almost all of the Dao teachings of the great underworld patriarch. When he saw the two, he said, "Senior brothers, you came at the right time. I was just looking for you." Dao Master Luo Zhan said, "Does the Grand Supreme have any instructions?" Daoist Xian Che said, "In order to deal with the void separation tribulation, I need to connect all the land of fortune, not just the void chaotic realm. Senior brothers, you need to hand over the seal of the chaotic realm to me." Every clan that controlled the chaotic realm had a seal of the chaotic realm, which was also the proof of their control over the realm. Luo Zhan and Miaoyu were the masters of the chaotic realm, so they naturally had a seal of the chaotic realm. When Dao Master Miaoyu heard this, he immediately frowned and said, "May I ask the Grand Supreme, isn't the seal of the void separation realm enough this time?" Daoist Xian Che's expression was indifferent as he said, "How could the void separation tribulation be so simple? Every land of fortune is a way out. I'm sure that both of you have seen the contents of the Imperial Edict, so you should be clear about what it says." Dao Master Miaoyu still wanted to say something, but Dao Master Luo Zhan beat him to it and said, "Since it is useful to the Grand Supreme, we will definitely hand it over." Daoist Xian Che said, "Then do it as soon as possible." After Luo Zhan and Miaoyu bowed, they retreated. When Dao Master Miaoyu was outside, he said, "Senior brother, this..." Dao Master Luo Zhan said, "I know what you want to say, junior brother, but what the Grand Supreme said is reasonable. According to the oracle, he should be in charge of all the chaotic realms and the land of fortune, so it is reasonable for him to ask me for the seal. Moreover, the Grand Supreme is high and mighty, so why would he fight with us for anything? It is just a seal, so what if it is gone? Are you afraid that he will take your position as the sect master?" Dao Master Miaoyu also knew that since this junior brother had spoken, then he could not disobey. Even though he was dissatisfied, it was not good for him to show it. Moreover, these words could be considered to have persuaded him. He said, "We can take out the seal, but what about senior brother Sunyu? He will definitely not take it out." Dao Master Luo Zhan thought for a moment, then sighed and said, "I will go and talk to him. The power of the Grand Supreme is not something we can resist. Even if we insist, it will be useless. I think senior brother Sun you should understand this." Dao Master Luo Zhan immediately went to the place where Dao Master Sun Yu was cultivating in seclusion, but he managed to persuade the latter on the same day. On the second day, the two of them came to the hall with 3 seals and said, "The seals of our 3 chaotic realms are here, and there is one more seal in the hands of the Qinsang bloodline. Does the Grand Supreme want us to go and take it?" Daoist Xianqi looked at the seal for a moment, then he put it away. He said, "There is no need. I am going to the Dark Void Realm to take control of the Land of Fortune, so I will just take it on the way." Dao Master Luo Zhan said, "When does the Grand Supreme plan to go there?" Daoist Xianqi said, "There's no time to lose. I've already calculated that the Dark Void Realm will be connected to the Land of Creation in a day or two. If we rush there tomorrow, we'll be able to take over this place." Usually, only the master of the chaotic realm would know when a chaotic realm would be connected to the Land of Fortune behind it, but it was no secret to the great experts of the God Refinement realm. On the second day, Daoist Xianqi led the two Dao masters, Luo Zhan and Miao Yu, as well as the masters of the various bloodlines to the Dark Void Realm. As a member of the Qinsang bloodline, Chen Jiliang was also brought along this time. There were originally domain gates between the four chaotic realms. If there was a true Yang cultivator in a chaotic realm, they could close the gate. Even the Grand Supreme of the God Refinement realm might not be able to find it immediately. However, no one in the Qinsang bloodline had reached this realm, so they were not obstructed in the slightest. After Daoist Xianqi arrived at the chaotic realm, he had already brought everyone to the top of the Qinsang bloodline's encampment. He saw an altar at first glance. It was undoubtedly built by the Qinsang school to pass through the realm gate when the two realms were connected. He said, "Wait here." Everyone behind him bowed and said yes. Daoist Xianqi descended. The location chosen by the Qinsang bloodline was just right, so he did not plan to change it. The two realms were connected, but the gate would not be naturally connected. It still needed the magic power of a great expert to open it. He walked up and silently calculated for a moment. It was the same as what he had calculated earlier. Now was the right time. He focused his mind, and under everyone's gazes, a spiritual light flickered on the altar. Then, like ripples on water, a light screen suddenly appeared in the air. In a split second, it covered half of the sky, and the incomparably dazzling aura caused the area where everyone was standing to dim down. Although some of the cultivators with profound cultivation in the Qinsang school could not see it with their own eyes, they could feel that the gate between the two realms had been opened. Their hearts sank unconsciously. Some of the more straightforward elders gritted their teeth and continuously used their magic power to crash against the seal again and again, trying to break through it. However, it was useless. The seal was just like the day when Venerable Zhenyang arrived. It was unshakable and unshakable. Chen Jiliang's heart was incomparably heavy when he saw this scene from behind. He closed his eyes and no longer looked at it. He only sighed heavily. Before the spirit refinement Weili, he really could not think of any way to salvage the situation. It seemed that the Qinsang bloodline's foundation had been robbed. However, at this moment, Daoist Xianqi, who was standing in front of the gate between the two realms, revealed a hint of astonishment. Because the gate that appeared just now wasn't opened by him. Right when he was circulating his magic power, it opened on its own. It was obvious that someone had come from the other side. His expression calmed down. This was where the Qinsang bloodline was located, so it might be someone else who had ascended here. This was fine. It was convenient for him to connect the two realms and go to that land of fortune. However, at this moment, a five-colored brilliance suddenly shone from the gate. Including the two true Yang cultivators, Luo Zhan and Miao Yu, they only took a glance at the brilliance and felt as if their consciousness had frozen. Their aura, magic power, and mind were unable to circulate. At this moment, Daoist Xianqi's expression also changed slightly. He seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. He immediately stretched out his hand and tried to close the gate. Boom! Just as the gate was about to change under his magic power, a boundless Weili forcefully stopped it. At the same time, a vast and boundless Weili arrived. Just the shockwaves from the collision alone caused the entire chaotic regions to tremble. Not only that, the four great chaotic regions and the worlds behind them also shook. This scene that resembled a heavenly tribulation terrified everyone present. They almost suspected that the void-leaving tribulation had arrived ahead of time. Taoist Xian Che's expression changed. He retreated far away and looked at the rainbow as if he was facing a great enemy. As if tens of thousands of years had passed, a young Taoist dressed in a black robe slowly stepped out of the endless screen of spiritual light. As his sleeves fluttered, boundless profound energy spread out and spread outwards. Just by standing there, it seemed as if the entire world was covered by him. When Luo Zhan and Miao Yu saw this person, they clearly felt the same feeling they had when they first saw Taoist Xian Che. However, the other party's Weili was far more magnificent and vast than before. If they could still feel it then, now, they couldn't even sense his emotions or distinguish external objects. At this moment, the only remaining trace of consciousness was only aware that they still existed in this world. Taoist Xian Che was shocked to find that he couldn't see through anything in front of this person. No matter how much of his magic power surged, it seemed to sink into a bottomless abyss. There was no response. He said with incomparable solemnity, "Who are you, sir?" The young Taoist glanced at him, then looked around. In an instant, he saw all the past and future changes in this place and learned everything he wanted to know from this junior. He stood on the altar with his sleeves behind his back, profound energy soaring behind him. He said indifferently, "Qinsang School, rumble." Thunder rumbled in the chaotic regions that had never changed since time immemorial, causing everyone's hearts to tremble. Hall Master Du Zhen, the sound of thunder lingered in the distance. Only his voice still reverberated in the sky. Zhang Yan. Chapter 2032. As soon as Zhang Yan finished speaking, the clap of thunder resounded once more. Accompanied by a rumbling sound, it landed heavily on the hearts of the crowd. Qinsang School. Hall Master Du Zhen. The Qinsang lineage actually had such a monstrous Weili expert. Everyone present here felt their hearts tremble, and they were terrified and uneasy. It wasn't just because of their fear towards the vast and mighty force, it was also because they noticed that they'd actually inadvertently been swept into a battle between great figures of the upper realm. Chen Jiliang couldn't help but be startled. The other party claimed to be from Qinsang School, but he didn't know him, so he must have ascended from the lower realm. But when did the magic power of someone from the lower realm become so strong? From the looks of it, even Taoist Xian Che, a spirit refinement Grand Supreme, had no choice but to retreat, so he was undoubtedly a Grand Supreme. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to pretend to be someone else. The fifth-generation sect master, Qin Qinggang, was sitting cross-legged in the inner room. He couldn't help but open his eyes. Just now, he also heard that voice and felt that Weili. Moreover, the moment it appeared, Taoist Xian Che's originally omnipresent aura was forcefully suppressed, as if it didn't exist anymore. He looked outside and discovered that there was only a ball of mysterious profound energy, and he couldn't see anything clearly. Hall Master Du Zhen. He muttered a few times, then immediately transmitted a message with his divine will, "Junior brother Zhua, this person, do you know him?" After a while, Zhui Yuming finally replied, "If it really is that person, then he is indeed a member of my Qinsang School, but not a junior under senior brother's tutelage." Qin Qinggang didn't care about this, and said seriously, "As long as he is a member of my Qinsang School, it's enough. With this kind of magic power, my Qinsang lineage will be able to avoid today's danger." At this moment, Taoist Xian Che looked at Zhang Yan with incomparable fear. Judging from the contact they had just now, there was no doubt that the latter's magic power was stronger than his. Not only that, because their magic powers couldn't fuse and collide, he was unable to see through Zhang Yan's origins and cultivation in the slightest. Ever since he'd attained the God refinement realm, he'd never seen such a thing. As for Zhang Yan's identity, he didn't doubt it at all. As a spirit refinement supreme expert, there was naturally no need for him to conceal his identity, so it must be true. Originally, if everything had gone smoothly, he would have already entered the land of fortune and tried to take control of this place. However, he did not expect that there would be another spirit refinement almighty who would interfere. However, since the other party claimed to be a disciple of the Qinsang, then no matter what his identity was, in terms of seniority, he was definitely lower than him. Since he couldn't use force to suppress him, he might as well reason with him. He straightened his body and raised his voice, saying, "Since you're a disciple of the Qinsang school, and you're still able to achieve such Weili, you must be related to the land of fortune in the lower realm." Zhang Yan looked at him indifferently and waved his sleeve. Boom! Before Daoist Xian Che could finish his words, his figure suddenly shattered, and then he was completely drowned in the boundless profound energy. Zhang Yan's expression was calm, as if he'd done something insignificant. In fact, it was so. He borrowed the power of fortune from Bu Su to come here, but the other party was merely an incarnation of his consciousness that had sunk into the present world. Their statuses weren't equal. If the other party wanted to talk to him, he would have to think of a way to come here personally next time, or wait for him to come to him when he was free. There was no need to pay too much attention to him now. When the sect masters of the various lineages saw this scene, they couldn't help but reveal terrified expressions. They didn't know about the changes in the abilities of spirit refinement cultivators, but when they saw Zhang Yan sweep Daoist Xian Che away with a mere wave of his sleeve, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive, they couldn't help but tremble in fear. Although they didn't directly do anything to the Qinsang lineage this time, they came with Daoist Xian Che. In a sense, they were also involved in this matter. Now that even Daoist Xian Che was killed, what would happen to them? Some of them wanted to defend themselves, but under the Weili's suppression, it caused the magic power in their bodies to be restrained, and they couldn't move a muscle. Even though they could still think, they couldn't say a word. Luo Zhan and Miao Yu watched helplessly as Zhang Yan killed Daoist Xian Che with a wave of his sleeve. The impact was so strong that it shook both their bodies and minds. Even though they knew that spirit refinement cultivators wouldn't die so easily, no matter what the result was, this cultivator who called himself the Hall Master of Qinsang School's Duzhen Hall was undoubtedly far stronger than Daoist Xian Che. Zhang Yan's sleeves fluttered, and profound energy rose from his back as he walked down from the altar. Dao Master Luo Zhan suddenly felt his body relax a little. He knew that it was right, so he retracted his aura a little, bowed, and said with difficulty, "Grand Elder, that Grand Elder Xian Che is the Patriarch's disciple." Zhang Yan glanced at him and said indifferently, "So what?" Just now, he had seen everything clearly from other places. If that Daoist Xian Che had come to visit the Dark Void domain according to etiquette, he could have given him some courtesy. But since he was an unwelcome guest, and his consciousness incarnation was here, why should he give him face? Saying that he was the disciple of the great underworld patriarch, could it be that the third-generation sect master, Yuan Zhongzi, was not? And how did these fellow disciples treat him? When Dao Master Luo Zhan heard this, a trace of fear arose in his heart. If the Grand Dao ancestor was reasonable, then he could naturally follow the rules. But if he was not reasonable, then everything could only be done according to the other party's mood. Dao Master Miaoyu saw that the situation was not good, and immediately sent a message to Chen Jiliang, saying, "Junior brother Chen, since this person claims to be from the Qinsang school, he must have some relationship with you. We are also following the orders, and this time, we are under the leadership of the Grand Elder, and we are not free to act on our own. I hope that you can explain this matter to the Grand Elder on account of us being from the same sect." However, Chen Jiliang closed his eyes and pretended not to hear. Although Daoren was usually modest and tactful, he also had a temper. He did not know the power of the Grand Elder, but he knew that if the Grand Elder wanted to attack, then no one here would be able to escape. So there was no need to say anything, and he might as well leave this person alone. Moreover, he did not think that he could persuade a Grand Elder with just his face. Dao Master Luo Zhan forced a smile, saying, "We followed the Grand Elder Xian Che here to find a place of fortune to deal with the calamity of leaving the sky, so that the 100 lineages can find a place. Now that the Grand Elder is here, I think it is useless for us to stay here, so, we will take our leave." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Although we are from the same lineage, the matters of the Qinsang school are not for you to speak. You can go back now, but this matter will not be so simple, and you will have to give the Qinsang school an explanation." As soon as he finished speaking, another thunder rumbled in the sky. Boom! At this moment, apart from Chen Jiliang who was still standing there, everyone who did not belong to the Qinsang school had disappeared without a trace. In the base of the Great Ocean sect, Daoi's spiritual master felt the world spinning. When he woke up, he looked around and realized that he was sitting in the cave abode, and he did not know how he came back. His face turned extremely ugly, and he was both shocked and fearful in his heart. It was actually the Grand Elder. Why is there such a person in the Qinsang school? Since there is such a person, why didn't you say it earlier? He felt that his previous mockery of Chen Jiliang was simply making a fool of himself in front of everyone, and now, he felt as embarrassed as he was happy at that time. Now, he felt as if there was a breath stuck in his throat, and it was extremely suffocating, but he could not vent it, so he could only endure it. It was not to say that it would hinder his cultivation, but it would definitely make his cultivation unsmooth. He stood up angrily, and inadvertently glanced at the sundial, and his heart shook. There was something wrong with the date engraved on it. It was yesterday, not today. Could it be that the sundial is broken? He examined it and found that it was not damaged, so he could not help but feel a trace of uneasiness in his heart. He immediately summoned his disciple and asked for the date, but found that the disciple's reply was also like the sundial, so he unconsciously became even more terrified, and asked, "Do you know where I went just now?" The disciple said in confusion, "Master has been in seclusion since he visited the two Tao sovereigns yesterday, and he has not gone out at all." Daoi's spiritual master shouted angrily, "Nonsense, I clearly went to see the two Tao sovereigns a few days ago, and this morning, I followed the Grand Elder to the Dark Void Realm. How can you not know?" The disciple did not know what to say, and could only mumble. Daoi's spiritual master waved his hand to dismiss the disciple, then he used his magic power to check the memories of all the disciples in the sect, and to his horror, he found that not only was the time wrong, none of the disciples had heard of the name of Grand Elder Xian Che, but this matter had already spread to the 4 regions. This feeling, it was as if everything they had experienced just now was an illusion. He immediately communicated with the other sect masters through the divine intent, but he found that other than the two Tao sovereigns who did not respond, the situation of the other sects was the same as his. Everyone had returned to their residences, but other than the cultivators who personally went to the Dark Void Realm, no one remembered Daoist Xian Che, and their memories only stopped at yesterday, as if they had disappeared for no reason one day. Daoi's spiritual master only felt waves of coldness in his heart. Right now, he was not sure if his memories had been changed at all. Was all this real, or was it all forced on them by the Almighty of the upper realm? In the main hall, the 3rd-generation sect master Yuan Zhongzi saw that the surrounding restrictions had been removed, so he walked out, and the 5th-generation sect master Qin Qinggang also came out of the cave abode. The two of them flew up into the sky, and stood next to Chen Jiliang. Zhang Yan solemnly cupped his hands, and said, "Greetings, ancestral masters." Yuan Zhongzi was surprised. He thought for a moment, then raised his sleeve, and returned the greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen. Chen Jiliang and Qin Qinggang also returned the greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen. Yuan Zhongzi said, "May I ask what the situation in the lower realm is like now, Hall Master Du Zhen?" Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and as he willed, scenes were reflected in the divine intents of the previous generation sect masters. From the time the Dark Azure sect joined forces with the Shaoqing sect to fight against the sects of the 9 continents, including the Jade Firmament sect, to the time they defeated the enemy and then ascended. From the time they battled the Demon Patriarch in the Mountain and Sea Realm, to the time they joined forces with the Profound Spirit sect to pacify the 4 regions, to the time they joined forces to fight Kong Yin. However, these scenes were rather vague, and could only give people a rough idea of what was going on, because Zhang Yan was not among them. As a spirit refinement cultivator, he had long since lost his past and future, and cultivators of the lower realm couldn't see him even if they wanted to. Yuan Zhongzi and the others sighed endlessly with emotion when they saw all of this. Presently, the Dark Azure sect was undoubtedly much stronger than before, and it had far exceeded their expectations. But it had undoubtedly experienced numerous difficulties and frustrations along the way, and the slightest carelessness in some dangerous areas would practically cause them to be doomed eternally. At this time, Zhang Yan said, since the ancestral masters are here, I will hand this item over to you to deal with. As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve, and 3 jade seals flew out, floating in front of the previous generation sect masters. Chen Jiliang looked at them, and said in surprise, these are the seals of the 3 chaotic realms? Chapter 2033. The 3 seals in Zhang Yan's hand were obtained from Taoist Xian Che after he dispersed his consciousness incarnation. If a disciple of the great underworld patriarch possessed this item, they would receive the Weili blessing left behind by the patriarch. The disciple would be guided to ascend from the lower realms to the great underworld patriarch, and they would also be acknowledged by the various bloodlines. It could be said that with this item, they would be able to legitimately occupy a chaotic realm. Chen Jiliang was a little surprised to see these seals. He had thought that Taoist Xian Che had come for the seals in Qinsang School's hands, but he hadn't expected that he would take away the seals in the hands of the 3 chaotic realms as well. It seemed that Taoist Xian Che's goal was even greater than he had imagined. He murmured, what is that Grand Elder Xian Che trying to do? Zhang Yan said, speaking of this, I have to mention the void-leaving tribulation that this junior spoke of. This is actually an unforeseen event in the outer realms, and because it involves a great expert, it is inconvenient for the patriarchs to know about it. However, if this tribulation comes, if there is no place to hide, even soul refinement cultivators won't be able to escape. The 4 chaotic realms all have places of fortune behind them, so it is very likely that Xian Che's goal is to devour these places of fortune and combine them into one. Yuan Zhongzi asked, is Hall Master Du Zhen's trip here related to this as well? Zhang Yan said, this trip is indeed related to this matter. Currently, my Qinsang school and the fellow Taoists of the various sects are hiding in these places of fortune and temporarily seeking shelter. However, there is no absolute certainty in this world, so I can only do my best to make up for this loophole. Chen Jiliang said, Daoren, I've negotiated with the Qingqin sect several times. That Taoist master Luo Zhan has always declared that he's acting on the orders of the founding master. In the past, he's also used this to control our Qinsang bloodline. However, as for the contents of the orders and what the founding master said, he's never told us. Zhang Yan said, I'm already clear about this matter. That was indeed the ancestral master's order, but it was only left behind for the Qingqin sect by the ancestral master. It was said that the land of creation could avoid the tribulation of leaving the void, and it was also said that there was a heaven and earth behind each of the 4 regions that one could hide in. When the time came, there might be a disciple who could achieve deification. If the tribulation came and they felt that it was impossible to resist, then they could ask for help from that person. Other than that, this order isn't directly related to our Qinsang. It's just that Luo Zhan and Miao Yu felt that one of the land of creation wasn't very safe, and the heaven and earth behind our Qinsang bloodline is the strongest of the 4 eras. Moreover, we don't have enough power to defend ourselves, so they used this as an excuse to invade. Yuan Zhongzi and the other former sect masters of the Qinsang all fell into deep thought. Even a great deification expert like Zhang Yan had to think of a way to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void, so it was obvious that this tribulation was extremely powerful. It was very likely that the founding master had prepared 4 paths of retreat by leaving behind 4 chaotic domains. That way, if the enemy broke through one of them, they wouldn't be completely cut off. There was no way that Taoist Xian Che hadn't thought of this, but he still did it. It was obvious that he'd already placed his own interests above those of the 100 lineages. Chen Jiliang said, may I ask Hall Master Du Zhen, how is that Grand Elder Xian Che doing now? Zhang Yan said, this time, it's only an incarnation of him. His true body is still outside the domain. If he comes again and still doesn't change his original intention, then I'll naturally come out to deal with him. Yuan Zhongzi nodded. Actually, if there was injustice between the 100 lineages, they could still worship the founding master. However, the founding master hadn't responded for a long time. If it wasn't for that, the 2 Dao masters probably wouldn't have the idea of taking over the foundation of the Qinsang lineage. After Dao Master Luo Zhan and Dao Master Miao Yu were expelled from the chaotic void domain, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts when they learned that a day had been inexplicably erased. When Taoist Xian Che was here, they only knew that his Weili was unstoppable. However, they couldn't understand the specifics because of their limited cultivation. Now, they could feel that the Grand Elder of the Spirit Refinement Realm seemed to be able to do everything that seemed inconceivable. The two of them hurriedly met to discuss countermeasures. Dao Master Miaoyu transmitted a message with his divine will. Senior brother, since we can't fight him, why don't we try to close the domain gate first? Dao Master Luo Zhan denied, don't say such words. With the power of the Grand Elder, do you think he doesn't know what you're doing? Even if you close the domain gate, what's the use? He doesn't need to come to you at all. He only needs to change your memories and let you open the gate on your own. Dao Master Miaoyu was also shocked when he heard him say this. If that was really the case, even he wouldn't know if it was him. He said, Senior brother is right, I was wrong. Dao Master Luo Zhan said, since the Grand Elder wants us to give an explanation, then we can only go to him to apologize and ask for forgiveness from the Qinsang lineage. It's better to do this as soon as possible. If we delay it for too long, it will make the Grand Elder unhappy, and I don't know what will happen. He thought that since Zhang Yan didn't do anything to them on the spot, as long as they sincerely begged, nothing would happen. After all, they didn't do anything to the Qinsang lineage. The key was how to deal with the sky-leaving tribulation. Even if they didn't think for themselves, they still needed to think for their disciples. Now that Taoist Xian Che was gone, they could only rely on the Grand Elder of the Qinsang school. Dao Master Miaoyu said, since we're going to apologize, we should at least give him a gift. The Qinsang school lacks nothing but profound stones. We can't take out such things, so what else can we do to show our sincerity? Dao Master Luo Zhan said, the only thing is to offer the land of fortune behind us. Dao Master Miaoyu frowned and said, Senior brother, do you really want to do this? He judged others by himself. After this incident, the Qinsang school might not care about their lives. If the great calamity came, there would be no way out. Dao Master Luo Zhan could still see the situation clearly and said calmly, the seal has been taken by Grand Elder Xian Che, and I have long lost control of myself. It's better to offer it to him. If Grand Elder Xian Che comes again, it has nothing to do with me. Let the two Grand Elders fight. Dao Master Miaoyu thought about it. There was really no other way. This was also the only way out. He said, why don't we invite senior brother Sun Yu out first? He has a good relationship with the Qinsang school. If he pleads, maybe we can find a way to save this matter. Dao Master Luo Zhan said, okay, I'll handle this matter. Taoist Sun Yu was invited out that day. After knowing the details, he thought for a while and said, I will go with the two junior brothers and ask the Grand Elder to forgive this matter. But the two junior brothers need to know that I can't control what the Grand Elder thinks. I can only do my best. Speaking of which, his position was not biased towards the Qinsang school. He thought that the same sect should not plot against each other. The various lineages should try their best to maintain the structure left by the great underworld patriarch. However, he was also ashamed that he was unable to stop the two from invading the Black Void chaotic domain. Therefore, he was willing to go with them to apologize. On the second day, the three Dao masters Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, and Miaoyu personally went to the Black Void chaotic domain to apologize. In order to show their sincerity, they came on a spiritual boat and did not hide their whereabouts along the way. Therefore, the matter quickly spread throughout the four great chaotic domains. When the disciples of the Yutsang sect learned of this, they were overwhelmed with emotions. In the past, because the Yutsang sect didn't have a true yang cultivator, they had to occupy a chaotic domain by themselves. When they interacted with the other sects, they were often targeted and ostracized. But now, their prestige had risen, and they felt proud. Yuan Zhongzi came to find Chen Jiliang and said, the three sects Dao masters came to visit, and Hall Master Duzhen said that he would no longer interfere in this matter. Senior brother, how do you think we should deal with it? Chen Jiliang thought for a while and said, the seal of the Jiyuan sect should be returned. The seals of the Qingchen sect and the Fuli sect can be kept in our hands for a while. He thought that with the Grand Elder like Zhang Yan here, there was no difference whether the seal was in their hands or not. Moreover, they did not need to covet the land of the other sections. Otherwise, there would be no difference with what Luo Zhan and Miao Yu did. But this time, the two sects had come to bully them, so they had no choice but to pay attention to it. Otherwise, they would think that the Qinsang school was easy to bully, so they could keep it for a while. As for how long, it would depend on what happened in the future. At this time, Zhang Yan was walking in the encampment of the Qinsang lineage. But as his mind turned, he was looking at the various chaotic domains and the world behind them. But other than these two domains that could be clearly seen, the one behind the Qingchen sect was incomparably blurry. That should be where Taoist Xian Che was. When he met Taoist Xian Che, he had thought about it. Although the other party was a soul refinement cultivator, he had never seen or felt the existence of the other party's magic power. Either the other party was concealed by the magic power of someone with a higher realm, or he had always been hiding in a place of fortune like the determined world or Bushu heaven. Otherwise, once the existence that invaded all things arrived, there would be no way for him to hide. But whether he was the only one in that place, or whether there were other people of the same generation staying there, he still did not know. Moreover, since the place where the Qinsang school ascended existed among the 4 great sects of the 9 continents, then the Shaoqing sect, Yuxiao sect, and even the Nether Spring sect must also have a place to go. Perhaps, they were also hiding in a similar place. Also, Taoist Master Fan Tu, who ascended from the 9 continents back then, was not limited to the people of the 3 great sections. Now, he did not know where they went. With his magic power, even if this person died in the endless void, he could still trace the process. But in reality, he did not see any traces, which was enough to prove that after leaving the 9 continents, they also had a place to go. In order to fight against that existence, especially now that he needed to rescue Quan Dao and Yishuan as much as possible, just the 5 of them were not enough. The more people, the better. If he could find the whereabouts of those ancestors or more of his fellow Taoists, perhaps he could join forces to do this. At this moment, in the place of fortune that connected with the clear sink chaotic domain, inside a cave dwelling, Taoist Xian Che was cultivating. But suddenly, he felt his consciousness incarnation disappear, and he couldn't help but be surprised. Then, his expression turned cold, and he thought to himself, could it be that someone of the same Taoist has interfered? Other than his fellow Taoist master Shen, it was impossible for anyone to threaten his consciousness incarnation. But in the chaotic domain, there was a Whaley of the great underworld ancestral master, so just now, no news had come back. Otherwise, he would at least know what was going on. As if sensing that he had woken up from his meditation, a cold voice suddenly sounded, "Fellow Taoist Xian Che, how is it? Have you found the place of fortune essence?" Taoist Xian Che was silent for a moment before replying, "My incarnation just now disappeared for no reason. It seems that something unexpected happened. Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment." The voice said, "Fellow Taoist Xian Che, don't forget what you promised me." Taoist Xian Che stood up and said coldly, "Of course I haven't forgotten. I will find a way to investigate this matter and give you an explanation." Chapter 2034. Zhang Yan's original plan was to merge this chaotic realm into Bushu heaven and eliminate the loopholes in his control as much as possible. But when he saw that the Black Void chaotic realm was connected to the other 3 realms, he temporarily put this plan on hold. Because if he did that, the Black Void chaotic realm would be completely isolated from the other realms and would no longer be connected. Even if he could leave Bushu heaven now, it wouldn't be easy to find these realms again in the vast void, much less with the existence of that existence outside. But since every chaotic realm was connected to a land of fortune, it meant that profound stones could be produced in these realms at least, and there was even a possibility of attaining the spirit refinement realm. From what Tao sovereign Luo Zhan knew, Taoist Xian Che had only recently attained the spirit refinement realm. In that case, it seemed that he was able to achieve this with the help of the land of fortune behind him. Of course, that was if he didn't encounter any other opportunities. If the remaining two realms were similar to this land of fortune, then logically speaking, it was also possible for a cultivator to attain the spirit refinement realm. But usually, a place with the essence of fortune would at most produce a cultivator to attain the spirit refinement realm, and it all depended on luck and fortune. Otherwise, these two realms wouldn't have remained silent until now. He thought for a moment and decided to go to one of the realms to investigate. However, the chaotic realm was outside of the land of fortune, and he could only go there when the two realms connected. He calculated in his mind. The four realms connected to the lower realms in a certain order. Clearchin would arrive first, then Qinsong, then Floatingly, and then Auspicious Source. After a while, they would gradually separate again. Clearchin sect was where Taoist Xian Che lived. He didn't plan to meet him before straightening out the chaotic realm, so he eliminated it first. Floatingly and Auspicious Source were the only two left. Floatingly sect's door would open a day later. Actually, with his magic power, he could directly enter the two realms before they completely connected, but when he thought of the pair of eyes in the void, he felt that it was better to restrain his movements. It would be bad if he accidentally attracted the attention of that existence. He waited for the day when the two realms would come close to each other as he predicted. He immediately split a wisp of his consciousness and cast it into that world. As soon as he entered, he immediately scanned his surroundings. Even though this place could be said to be the lower realm of the Fuli sect, there were numerous sects here. Even though the Fuli sect could be said to be a large sect here, it didn't occupy a dominant position. The reason for this was that ever since Vast Jade became a true Yang cultivator, in order to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void mentioned in the Imperial Edict, he issued an edict that all cultivators in the lower realms who reached the heavenly abode realm should immediately use the edict to come to the chaotic realm. They were not allowed to stay in the lower realms. This kind of thing couldn't be done in the 9 continents. The 9 continents' heaven and earth gate was especially strong. Unless one cultivated to the mortal transformation realm, one could forget about taking even half a step out of the outer world. In truth, the chaotic domain was originally located in the land of fortune. If the land of fortune was affected by the void leaving tribulation, then the flowing chaotic domain wouldn't be able to escape as well. However, the flowing chaotic domain still had a path of retreat. Because the 4 chaotic domains were connected, they could hide in other chaotic domains. From the looks of it, Vast Jade and Luo Zhan should have long set their sights on the Qinsong lineage. After Zhang Yan circled around, he immersed his consciousness into the depths of this world. He confirmed that this place was indeed where the essence of creation was. However, as he had previously known, this place was far inferior to Bushutian. Perhaps Luo Zhan and Vast Jade had also noticed this, which was why they wanted to occupy the same chaotic domain. He retracted his chi dynamic and looked out of the present world. He found that there was a pressure shrouding it, but it was not difficult to recognize that it was caused by the after effects of that existence's mana. Even though that existence had not set this place as its target, there was no one controlling this place after all. Once that existence's consciousness was focused here, it could immediately seize this place and use it as a bargaining chip to increase its strength. However, no spirit refinement cultivator could appear here in a short period of time, so it was impossible for there to be a master here. If that was the case, in order to avoid this, he could only do it himself. But if he relied on his own strength, there would be many difficulties. Fortunately, he had the backing of Bushutian Weili, so it wasn't difficult to do this. He thought, I need to talk to the people of the 3 sections. Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, and Vast Jade, the 3 Dao masters, crossed the world and traveled for many days before they arrived at the Black Void chaotic domain. In front of the Qinsong lineage, they bowed to apologize. In order to show their sincerity, Luo Zhan and Vast Jade even invited the heads of the 100 lineages to be witnesses. Whether they thought so or not, at least they had done enough. They were of the same lineage, so it wasn't good to not give face. In the end, no one in the Qinsong school was harmed. Yuan Zhongzi said on the spot that this matter was over and would not pursue it in the future. In the future, the disciples of the school were not allowed to mention this matter when they went out, or they would be punished for disrespecting their elders. He also returned the seal from the Jiyuan sect. Luo Zhan and Vast Jade thought that after Xian Che disappeared, the seal was taken away along with him. They didn't expect that it would fall into the hands of the Qinsang school in the end. But after thinking about it carefully, they realized that this was a good thing for them. Because if Taoist Xian Che came again, he wouldn't look for them. He would only look for the Qinsang school that held the seal. At least they wouldn't need to be involved in the battle of the Spirit Refinement Grand Supreme anymore. After apologizing, the three prepared to leave. At this moment, a Taoist child came and said, "Three Tao Masters, the Grand Supreme requests your presence." Taoist Sun Yu said, "Since the Grand Supreme has invited us, we should go and pay our respects." Sun Yu and the other two followed the Taoist child to a hall. They saw Zhang Yan sitting upright on a praying mat. The profound energy behind him soared into the sky, and there was also a brilliant five-colored aura that covered the sky and the earth. He was clearly sitting there, but he gave off the feeling that he was everywhere. Taoist Sun Yu's cultivation was the highest among the three. He had followed the great underworld patriarch for the longest time, so his knowledge was also above the other two. He understood that when a cultivator reached this level, they could no longer be restrained by any heaven and earth. They could leave at any time. Not mentioning the other party's identity, just his cultivation was worthy of respect. He immediately bowed and said, "The Grand Supreme greets you." Luo Zhan and Vast Jade also bowed. Zhang Yan, however, stood up and returned the bow. He said, "Greetings, everyone." He spread his sleeves and made an inviting gesture. "Please sit down and talk." Taoist Sun Yu was originally on friendly terms with Qinsong, so he deserved his bow. As for Luo Zhan and Vast Jade, although they had disagreements before, now that the two sides had reconciled, there was no need to look at them as before. After all, these two were also the great underworld patriarch's direct disciples, so they should be given some face. The three looked at each other and sat down. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and sat down as well. He said, I have already seen that there is a place of fortune behind the chaotic domain where everyone lives. This place has great implications, so we can't ignore it." Tao Master Luo Zhan said, "If the Grand Supreme needs it, feel free to take it. According to the Patriarch's decree, there should be a Grand Supreme who can help us avoid the calamity of leaving the sky." Tao Master Miao Yu also said, "That's right. The Grand Supreme's cultivation is far superior to Xian Che's, so it's more suitable for him to do this." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's not that I'm useful, and I don't want to occupy your place. It's just that the existence of this world can be used to protect us, but it can also attract the calamity." Taoist Sun Yu asked, "The Grand Supreme is referring to the calamity of leaving the sky. But if this place can protect us, why would it attract the calamity?" Zhang Yan said, "If this land of fortune needs to protect living beings, then it needs to have a deity ascension cultivator, or else it will be an ownerless land. The tribulations of void separation is triggered by an unfathomable existence. If he or she discovers these places, he or she can come and invade them at any time. Not only will I not be able to use them, but I will also be adding to his power." When Taoist Miao Yu heard this, he raised his head, cupped his hands and said, "Grand Supreme, forgive me for asking this boldly. Since it's like what the Grand Supreme said, then isn't what the Grand Supreme is doing the right way?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "If it's really possible to take over the four regions' places of fortune, then it can indeed be considered a good thing. Unfortunately, in my opinion, although this Xian Che has the intention, he doesn't have the ability to do so. Among these four places of fortune essence, Bushutian was the most difficult to control. He was able to do so because the profound stone used for his success was originally nurtured here. Moreover, he was originally in the present world, so he was originally connected to Bushutian. Both sides could be said to be incomparably compatible. Taoist Xian Che was someone from another world. It wasn't impossible for him to achieve this, but he would have to pay more than him, let alone take over a place of fortune. He was afraid that before he could succeed, that existence who could destroy all beings would have already killed his way here. Of course, if there wasn't just one person behind Taoist Xian-che and he had the help of other people of the same generation, then there was a certain chance that they could succeed if they each took charge of a place. Actually, he thought that this possibility was instead the highest based on his objective. Because this involved too much spirit refinement Whaley, it was impossible for people of the lower realms to explain in too much detail. Thus, he only roughly explained it to the three of them, and also mentioned his own guess. When Sun Yu and the others heard this, they instantly realized the severity of the problem. Putting aside the void-leaving tribulation, if there was someone else behind Xian-che, then it definitely couldn't be the ancestral master's disciple. No matter how the four regions fought in the past, they were of the same bloodline. If there was an outsider involved, then it would be a different matter. He stood up and bowed solemnly, saying, "We are powerless to fight against an upper realm expert. If that's really the case, then I'll leave everything to you, Grand Supreme." Taoist Xian-che stood in front of the altar with a heavy expression. Originally, before the upper and lower realms were connected, Taoist Luo Zhan had already been in contact with them. However, no matter how he called out, there was no response. Either they weren't in the sect, or they were unwilling or afraid to respond. Right now, he was anxious to find out what exactly happened in the chaotic domain. He wasn't like Zhang Yan, who controlled Busu Tian. His main body couldn't go there, so he could only continue to send his avatar to investigate. However, as long as his avatar entered the domain and observed carefully, he would be able to find out everything. Unless the opponent who killed his avatar had been waiting there all along. If that was the case, it meant that the chaotic domain was very likely already occupied by someone else. That was the most troublesome situation. He guided his consciousness, and in an instant, an avatar walked out. It passed through the gate of two realms and once again headed towards the clear sync chaotic domain. Chapter 2035. Taoist Xian-che's consciousness incarnation appeared once more in the clear sync chaotic domain. He was prepared for the worst when he came, but the attack he expected didn't happen. This made him feel slightly relieved. This proved that the person who destroyed his incarnation wasn't after him. It was very likely that there was a conflict because of some reason. As long as he could communicate with the other party, there would always be a way to solve the problem. At the very least, he would be able to understand the other party. He scanned the entire chaotic domain and found that the master of the Clear Sync sect, Dao Venerable Luo Zhan, wasn't here. When his consciousness extended to the other chaotic domains, it was blocked by a force. This was the Whaley left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Of course, the reason why Taoist Xian-che was blocked was because it was only his consciousness incarnation that came here. If his true body could come here, he could still bypass this force and achieve his goal. This didn't mean that the Whaley left behind by the patriarch was weak. It was because once it exceeded a certain limit, the chaotic domain itself would be crushed first. In order to prevent that from happening, the Whaley was destined to exist only in a limited form. Taoist Xian-che immediately moved his consciousness and left the Clear Sync chaotic domain. He was about to explore other chaotic domains, but at this moment, he sensed an aura in the flowing chaotic domain. This meant that the other party had been here before. Even though they hadn't met face to face, the tyrannical power contained behind the other party's back was exceptionally shocking. Thus, he directly used his own magic power to test the other party. At the same time, he wanted to find a way to understand the general situation on the other side from the collision of magic power. However, the situation exceeded his expectations. Just now, when he tried to do so, his entire body shattered with a loud bang in the next moment. Inside the cave, Taoist Xian-che's true body was waiting for news. Suddenly, he frowned because his consciousness incarnation had actually collapsed and dispersed once again. However, this time, because a remnant of his consciousness was transmitted back, he finally found something useful. He learned that the other party's Whaley was especially powerful. Just now, the result wasn't actually the other party's counterattack. The difference between the two parties was so great that the collision of magic power didn't form a resistance and directly destroyed his incarnation. The other party seemed to have entered with their true bodies. He didn't know how they did it, but he knew that he couldn't do the same thing. If he forced it, it would only cause the chaotic realm to move further away from him, or perhaps he would never be able to touch it again. The difference in power meant that the two of them could not speak equally. Even if it was him, if there was no friendship between the two of them, he would not have the mood to communicate with a consciousness avatar of the same generation. However, after thinking about it, he decided to continue sending his doppelgangers. This time, he wasn't going to probe the other party, but rather to invite the other party over for a chat. If the other party was apprehensive and was unwilling to come, then both parties could communicate through their consciousness avatars. However, if the other party refused to communicate with him, that would be the worst-case scenario. He hadn't figured out what to do yet, so he could only wait and see if the first step could be achieved. With that in mind, another consciousness incarnation walked out and entered the clear sync chaotic realm again. A wisp of Zhang Yan's consciousness was immersed in the land of fortune behind the Fu Li sect. He was prepared to take control of this place just like how he controlled Busu Tian. However, if that existence suddenly invaded at this time, then he would immediately give up on this place to prevent the other party from finding the other chaotic realms and the land of fortune behind them. As for whether he should combine the four lands of fortune into one, he had no plans to do so for the time being. The structure of the four domains was undoubtedly arranged by the great underworld patriarch, so there might be a deeper meaning behind it. Therefore, he didn't plan to destroy the structure here. Even if the three domains were under his control, he would only control them separately and not mix them together. If it was only out of consideration for the urgent situation, he could have asked Taoist priest Xinchang and the others to come over and help him, or even entrust these few domains to them. However, the problem was that all the sects here were taught by the great underworld patriarch. He could interfere because he was a true disciple of the Qinsang school, so it was perfectly justifiable for him to do this. However, it would be extremely inappropriate if he let outsiders here, so he should try to avoid it. Moreover, there was no contract between spirit refinement cultivators, so there was a limit to their trust. If they weren't under his control, it would be very difficult to guarantee that things would develop in the direction he wanted. It should be known that even spirit refinement cultivators themselves couldn't guarantee that things would develop in the direction they wanted. At this moment, his consciousness was constantly immersed in the depths of this land of fortune. He had the experience of refining Bushutian once, so he had learned a lot. His progress was considered smooth, but there were obstacles because he was not from this world, so he could not perfectly merge with it. Fortunately, he had Bushutian to back him up, so he was strong enough to defeat the weak. In the end, he was able to do this. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly sensed something. After pondering for a moment, an incarnation walked out of his body and walked outside. This time, Daoist Xian Che didn't try to use his magic power to contact Zhang Yan again. Instead, he obediently walked towards the flowing muddy domain. After entering this place, he said, "I'm here to discuss something. Fellow Daoist, please show yourself." Not long after, he suddenly discovered that there was a hole in his perception. Then, he saw a young Daoist dressed in a black robe with 5 lights shining on his back. He walked on profound energy, and his aura was restrained like a bottomless abyss. Daoist Xian Che's heart trembled. The person who came was undoubtedly an incarnation of his consciousness, but the Weili he displayed was still stronger than him. He raised his sleeves, cupped his hands, and said, "Greetings, fellow Daoist." Zhang Yan also raised his sleeves and bowed. Daoist Xian Che said, "This time, I took the liberty of asking you to come out, fellow Daoist." "Why did you destroy my incarnation, fellow Daoist?" He had tried to understand what had happened from the cultivators of the chaotic domain, but either they didn't know, or he was blocked by an inexplicable power. In order to avoid suffering the same fate as last time, he decisively stopped and chose to question Daoist Xian Che now. Zhang Yan said, "It's not enough that you've obtained the land of fortune behind the clear sink muddy domain, but you still want to invade other sects and Qinsang's land of fortune. This is too much, so I just now stopped you." Daoist Xian Che said in surprise, "Fellow Daoist, are you from the Qinsang bloodline?" He felt troubled, and this was what he didn't want to see the most. If it was someone from the outside world, he would have a righteous reason to call for help even if he couldn't defeat the other party. However, the other party was also a descendant of the great underworld ancestral master, so he couldn't use this method. However, these lands of fortune were very important to him. Not only were they used to avoid the void leaving tribulation, but they were also related to a certain promise. He couldn't give them up, so he said, "Back then, the patriarch told me to do my best to help the sects of the four regions avoid the void leaving tribulation. Back then, the patriarch had instructed me to do my best to help the sects of the four regions avoid the calamity of leaving the void. The reason I sent my avatar here earlier was because of this." After pausing for a moment, he said in a serious tone, "I am only acting according to the patriarch's instructions." Fellow Taoist stopping me seems to be going against the patriarch's words. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "But the patriarch didn't say anything about combining the lands of fortune. The division of the four regions was decided by the patriarch back then. Without the patriarch's orders, it's only right for I to protect them." Taoist Xian Che frowned. He raised his hand and took out an item. He held it in his palm and said, "The token is here." Zhang Yan glanced at it. It was a jade talisman. Every direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch had such an item. Yuan Zhongzi, Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, Miao Yu, and the others all had such a token. He smiled and said, "This item can only prove that you're indeed the patriarch's direct disciple, but it can't prove that the merging of the lands of fortune was the patriarch's words. It can't be trusted." Taoist Xian Che frowned and said, "Is this still not enough? The edict originally ordered me to help the various sects avoid the great calamity. You should understand that without the land of fortune behind the dark void domain, just the other three places might not be able to withstand the calamity of leaving the void." Zhang Yan said solemnly, "I am a disciple of the Qinsang sect. I naturally won't sit by and watch my fellow sect members suffer such a great calamity. When the time comes, I will do my best to protect them. You don't have to worry about this." Taoist Xian Che looked deeply at him. Zhang Yan's words had imperceptibly dissolved his biggest excuse. Knowing that there was no way to continue the discussion today, he didn't say anything more. He cupped his hands and turned to leave. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. If it was really as he had guessed and there was someone behind it, then that person would definitely do something. However, he wasn't afraid in the slightest since he was here. The biggest enemy at the moment was still from outside. When he thought up to this point, he suddenly sensed something. He noticed that the aura of that person had changed slightly. It seemed to be strong and weak at times, but it wasn't like this before. He couldn't help but be moved. That existence should be searching for the essence of fortune with all his might at this moment and trying to steal and devour it to strengthen himself. Even if he hadn't found this place for the time being, he would definitely find another place. Therefore, during this period of time, his strength should be rising, and he should be able to sense it very easily. He didn't think that suppressing Quan Dao and the other person would be able to delay his full strength. Just from the fact that he easily stopped them from entering Busushan, it was obvious that this matter wasn't as difficult as he imagined. Such a situation allowed him to make a guess. Since the great underworld patriarch and his peers had predicted the void leaving tribulation, there was no reason for them not to make a backup plan. They must have made preparations. Looking for a place that could be used to shelter the essence of fortune was one of the reasons. Stepping forward bravely and taking the initiative to eliminate the danger was another. Now that his strength couldn't grow, and there were fluctuations in his aura, it was very likely that someone had appeared to stop him. If that was the case, could he try to contact that person? He thought for a moment and gave up on this idea. Because if there was really someone who could fight against that existence, then his cultivation was obviously very high. Even if he didn't completely conceal his magic power and aura so that others couldn't sense him, he wasn't someone that could be easily found by others. His gaze suddenly became a little deeper. It would be best if the one fighting against that existence could win, but if he failed and was suppressed into eternal silence, that would be the worst situation. Not only would there be one less almighty who could fight against that existence, but that existence would take a great step forward on the path of invading and destroying everything. Chapter 2036. Zhang Yan pondered deeply. Since that existence couldn't leave for the time being, could he use this time to do something? For example, finding a way to rescue Quan Dao and Shen Qingqiu. Or, if his true body left Bushutian and sank his consciousness into the land of fortune behind the flowing muddy domain, it would only take an instant for him to enter the void. However, even though he thought of all these, there were still some problems that he needed to solve in reality. Because the other 4 people of the same generation were also in Bushutian, it was impossible for his true body to leave Bushutian. Otherwise, no one knew what would happen if he lost his suppression. Also, even if he left Bushutian, he might not be able to find the real world where the flowing muddy domain resided. As for directly escaping to the void from the land of fortune, it was also impossible. Although this place and Bushutian both belonged to the essence of fortune, since they were separated, they were already 2 different worlds. Before he completely refined them, he couldn't enter with his true body. After thinking for a while, he thought that although there were all kinds of difficulties here, it wasn't impossible. For example, when he went to rescue Quan Dao and Shen Qingqiu, he could summon Shen Chang and the others. However, there was a prerequisite, and that was that the chaotic domain had to be safe and sound first. If there was someone spying on him in the real world at all times, then he couldn't disregard everything and go out to face that existence. So no matter what, if he wanted to take the initiative to attack, he had to first deal with Daoist Xian Che. If he didn't deal with this place, then he wouldn't be able to do anything. However, he didn't plan to take the initiative to find that person. The land of fortune behind Qing Chen Tian was his home field, and he didn't know what the situation was like there. It was definitely not a good choice to go there rashly. Instead of that, he might as well wait for that person to come to him. However, he believed that he wouldn't have to wait for too long. After all, the land of fortune behind Qing Chen Tian and the land of fortune were connected for a time. After a period of time, the 2 realms would be separated again. If Daoist Xian Che didn't come to him before then, he didn't know how long it would take for him to wait for the next opportunity. If that person wasn't afraid of that existence coming to find him, then he could try waiting. He would be happy to see that happen. However, if that existence in the void had already finished off his opponent during this period of time, causing him to no longer have a chance to attack, then that would be the will of the heavens. It was not that he was unwilling to do so, but that it was beyond his power to do so. On the other side, Daoist Xian Che's consciousness avatar had already returned to his original body, and he instantly understood everything. He knew that he couldn't solve this matter by himself, so he raised his head and said, "Is fellow Daoist Rendu here?" Not long after, a voice appeared and said, "Fellow Daoist is looking for me. Has the matter over there been settled?" Daoist Xian Che said, "I ran into some trouble." The voice said with displeasure, "Fellow Daoist, you promised us." Daoist Xian Che interrupted the voice and said, "That is indeed the case. I have also tried my best to fulfill my promise. This trip was not able to fulfill my wish, and this is not what I want to see either. If fellow Daoist still wishes to fulfill your earlier promise, then you should be thinking about how to resolve this matter instead of blaming me." The voice fell silent for a while before it spoke again. "What kind of trouble is it exactly?" Daoist Xian Che said, "I met a fellow Daoist who cultivated the spirit refinement realm there." The voice didn't seem too surprised. It was obvious that it had a certain guess after Daoist Xian Che's avatar disappeared for no reason. It said, "It seems that someone has their eyes on the land of creation as well. I will send my avatar to deal with this matter together with fellow Daoist." Daoist Xian Che said, "If this matter could be easily resolved, then I wouldn't have said that it was troublesome." He emphasized, "Based on my contact with him, it seems that the person who foiled my plan can enter the chaotic realm directly." The owner of the voice didn't speak for a long time. He originally thought that Daoist Xian Che was deliberately evading him in order to obtain more things, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. Although some of them had already refined the land of creation before them, it wasn't enough to protect everyone, and it couldn't help any of them enter the chaotic realm directly. While the consciousness avatar was enough to deal with those of the lower realm, it wasn't a threat at all when facing those of the same realm. After a while, it asked, "How is this person's cultivation?" Taoist Xian-che replied, "It's above mine, but I can't find out his foundation. He has most likely passed the barrier of understanding the truth, but I can't guess if he's even stronger." At this time, the aura in front of him suddenly shook, and an old Taoist with an ancient face walked out. This person asked with a serious expression, "Fellow Taoist Xian-che, could it be that you can't try to persuade this person?" Compared to choosing to fight, he preferred to use a gentle method to resolve this matter. It wasn't that they didn't dare to fight, but when facing a fellow spirit refinement realm cultivator, direct conflict was the most unwise choice. After all, even if they could defeat the opponent, they couldn't kill him completely. In the end, it would only bring more trouble. Taoist Xian-che shook his head and said, "He won't give up that land of creation." Daoren asked, "Why?" Taoist Xian-che said, "Because this person comes from a sect, and he's also the ancestral master's bloodline." The old man immediately understood what he meant. If that land of creation was originally an ownerless object, when an external force or someone who was originally involved with this place intervened, then the other party might choose to compromise and give up. However, since he could openly take the land of creation as his own, why would he agree to share it with others? Just like Taoist Xian-che himself, if it wasn't for a certain reason, he wouldn't have agreed to let them have a share of this place. He said very discontentedly, "Fellow Taoist, didn't you say that it's impossible for any of your ancestral master's descendants to reach the spirit refinement realm?" Taoist Xian-che frowned and said, "I thought so back then too, because the ancestral master never mentioned this person, and he didn't even mention that there was someone among the younger generation who could achieve such an achievement. The matters that the ancestral master took care of back then were all entrusted to me, so how could I have imagined that there would be such a variable?" That Daoren said in a deep voice, "If we want to fight against this person, then we can only refine a magic artifact to help us enter the chaotic domain." Taoist Xian-che thought for a moment. If they used the fragment of the essence of creation, they could indeed refine such a magic artifact to help them restrain their magic power and enter the chaotic domain or even the land of creation. However, he thought of a flaw. It takes a lot of time to refine such a magic artifact, and we may not be able to wait that long. If it was an ordinary treasure, they could refine it in an instant, but this kind of thing was different. It required more time and energy. If that existence came looking for them during this period of time, or if the two realms closed, then even if they refined it, it would be useless. Daoren said, "Just now, I've already inspected it, and it's very peaceful in the void. That existence won't come looking for us in the short term, so you don't have to worry, fellow Taoist." When he said that, he added, "Moreover, it won't take long to refine this thing." Taoist Xian-che immediately reacted and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you going to use the power of creation to refine the magic artifact?" The old Taoist said, "That's right. It's indeed too slow to refine it with just our powers alone. However, we now possess a land of fortune, and we can use its power to complete this task." Taoist Xian-che thought for a moment and agreed that it was indeed possible. Although the magic artifact refined this way wouldn't be perfect and wouldn't last long, they didn't need to pursue this right now. He said, "Then we need to hurry up. The two realms won't wait for us for long." That Daoren didn't say anything. His body disappeared like an illusion, just like how he came. 3 days later, that Daoren returned. When Taoist Xian-che saw that person, his eyes couldn't help but focus. That person didn't appear in front of him as an incarnation like before, but appeared in person. Moreover, he had restrained his magic power. He said, "It seems that fellow Taoist has already refined that magic artifact." That Daoren waved his sleeve, and a ray of spiritual light was cast over. Taoist Xian-che saw that it was a spiritual bead, and with a thought, he withdrew it into his body. He silently circulated it for a moment, and said, "Just the two of us?" That Daoren said indifferently, Is just the two of us not enough? We're going to let that person know that we can also appear in front of him. Even if his cultivation is higher than ours, he won't dare to take the risk of leaving the chaotic realm to attack us. Taoist Xian-Che nodded, understanding what he meant. If the spirit refinement cultivators fought in the chaotic realm, then both sides would leave the chaotic realm and return to the void. Such consequences wouldn't matter if it was on a normal day, but there was that person in the void right now, and he probably wouldn't let go of any spirit refinement cultivator who appeared in the range of his magic power. Therefore, they only went to let that person know that they had the ability to cause such consequences. Since the separation of the two realms wasn't far away, the two of them didn't waste too much time here. After a brief discussion, they sank into the clear sink chaotic realm together. After arriving here, the two of them didn't stop and went straight to the black void chaotic realm. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting on the sky cloud platform. He looked up when he sensed the two's auras, and saw Taoist Xian-Che and Daoren coming together. He could tell with a glance that the two of them had come with their real bodies. Taoist Xian-Che came forward, cupped his fist, and bowed. He said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I'm here today for the matter of last time." His tone was slightly solemn as he said, "I know that you've already occupied the land of fortune behind the black void chaotic realm. Since you've already obtained it, we won't fight with you over it. As long as you're willing to let us take the other places of fortune, we can avoid a conflict." Their original plan was to occupy the land of fortune behind the three chaotic realms, and then use the power of the three places to refine Busu Tian. Now that Zhang Yan was blocking their way, they couldn't achieve their goal, so they could only settle for the next best thing. Zhang Yan looked at Taoist Xian-Che and said indifferently, "The ancestral master told you to borrow the land of fortune to return to the Vein Protection realm to pass on his teachings, but now you want to share this land with me. Please forgive me for not being able to agree to this." Chapter 2037. Taoist Xian-Che's expression turned slightly ugly when he saw Zhang Yan's refusal, but it returned to normal in the blink of an eye. He said, "How is this a private matter? Even if I have those blessed lands in my hands, why would I not care about the juniors of the same sect? With the ancestral master's decree, as long as it's passed down by the ancestral master, I will definitely protect them and not let anything happen to them." However, Zhang Yan said, "Your words are unconvincing. Today, you conspired with outsiders to steal the place that was passed down by the ancestral master. It's not your private property, but you insist on giving it to others. With such actions in the past, how do you know if you will place the outsiders' interests above the interests of the same sect in the future?" Taoist Xian-Che was even more displeased when he heard him say that, but he still tried to defend himself. "How could you not know that with the tribulation of void leaving in front of us, how could I resist it with my strength alone? With the help of a few fellow Taoists, I will have a higher chance of success. This way, I will be able to refine the blessed lands faster. If I can gather all these lands in one place in the future, I won't have to fear this tribulation anymore, and I will be able to better protect the sects and bloodlines." Daoren also said, "Your words don't make sense. We are all soul refinement cultivators, and we have no interaction with those of the lower realms. No matter what, they will not come to take advantage of us. Protecting them is just a small matter, and it doesn't cost us anything. Why do we have to be such evil people? Offend the ancestral master above us for no reason?" Zhang Yan sneered. Soul refinement cultivators indeed wouldn't bicker with the cultivators of the lower realms, and they wouldn't care about their lives either. If they obtained the blessed lands and Taoist Xian-Che said a few words, perhaps those sects would really be protected. However, his words seemed to make sense, but in reality, he intentionally avoided one thing, and that was the great underworld ancestral master had left the ancestral master's juniors in the first place. What did it have to do with these people? In other words, the 100 lineages sects were the masters of those blessed lands. Now that the owner hadn't said anything, the outsiders were saying that they could protect them after taking over this place. What kind of logic was that? Of course, not everything in the world could be reasoned with. At the end of the day, it all depended on who was stronger and who was weaker. If the four great chaotic realms didn't have a spirit refinement almighty on their side, then there was no point in saying all this. But now that he was here, that person could forget about getting what he wanted. Ignoring Daoren, he looked at Daoist Xian-che and said, I have a question. Is the blessed land behind the clear sink chaotic realm still in your hands? Daoist Xian-che frowned and said, so what if I am? So what if I am not? Zhang Yan said, if not, you couldn't even protect the land of fortune behind you, and it fell into someone else's hands. How can you protect the sect? Daoist Xian-che immediately fell silent. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately understood that the person in charge of the blessed land wasn't Daoist Xian-che. From this point of view, it was no wonder that Daoist Xian-che was on the outsider's side. If he refused to cooperate, he would probably be driven out immediately. However, it was strange that Daoist Xian-che had occupied this place because of the great underworld ancestral master's arrangements, but now it had fallen into someone else's hands. No one knew what had happened to him. The old Daoist saw that Zhang Yan's attitude was firm and that he wasn't willing to give in. His voice was slightly cold as he said, it seems that fellow Daoist is not willing to give in. Since words won't work, then we can only compete with force. Zhang Yan could hear the threat in his words. He smiled faintly and said, very well. Since you want to fight, why don't we fight right here and now? As soon as he said that, the magic power that he had originally restrained suddenly spread out and instantly collided with the magic power of the two people. Daoren was shocked. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan would attack immediately because of a disagreement. Was he really not afraid of that existence coming to find him after falling into the void? If it was possible, he didn't want to attack either. Just now, he wanted to make Zhang Yan feel apprehensive. But since things had come to this, he couldn't care about anything else. He immediately changed his mind and met the attack with his magic power. Before the magic power of both sides collided, the surrounding chaotic domain suddenly faded. Then, both sides realized that they had unconsciously jumped into the void. This was because the chaotic domain couldn't coexist with their enormous Weili. So, the two of them separated in an instant. When Daoist Xian-che and Daoren saw that they had fallen into the void, they immediately went on full alert. Their expressions also became extremely grave. Right now, the most dangerous enemy in the void was undoubtedly that existence. If they discovered that it had come to find them, they would immediately give up on this matter and try to escape back to the land of fortune that protected them. The moment Zhang Yan released his magic power, he had already split his consciousness to go to where Daoist Xinchang and the others were. He attached great importance to Bushutian. It would be fine if he was alone, but there were many fellow Daoists and disciples here. He had no choice but to be cautious. Since he had already come out, he wouldn't let Daoist Xinchang and the others stay here. So, he was prepared to summon them. Ever since Daoist Xinchang and the others entered Bushutian, they had been cultivating diligently. When they saw his incarnation, they hurriedly stood up and greeted him. Zhang Yan roughly explained his deduction and invited the four of them to come to the void to watch over him. The four of them didn't dare to disobey. Even though they were afraid of that existence in the void, Zhang Yan was the master of Bushutian. Right now, he was negotiating with them politely, but if they refused, then Zhang Yan could expel them from Bushutian at will. If that happened, it was obvious what would happen to them. At this moment, Daoist Xinchang said that Daoist Xian-che probably has helpers outside. If we leave this place, will there be outsiders who will take advantage of this? It wasn't that he didn't want to leave, but he was indeed worried. After all, Bushutian was the only place they could stay. He had no choice but to consider this. Zhang Yan said, "You're right, fellow Daoist. However, I have already carefully considered this matter and prepared for it. There shouldn't be any problems with this." It wasn't difficult for him to see that Daoist Xian-che and the others had borrowed the help of a magic tool to enter the chaotic domain. It was already extremely fast to be able to refine two similar magic tools in such a short time. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be more. Even if someone came to Bushutian, it would be a clone at most. He had also left his consciousness clone there, so it wouldn't be much of a threat to Bushutian. Furthermore, because of external threats, it was impossible for the land of fortune behind the Qingqian sect to be left unguarded. Someone would definitely be left behind to guard it, and that person would most likely be the master of the place. Otherwise, once that existence that had destroyed everything came, he would be able to easily take this place away. Seeing that he was already prepared, Daoist Xinchang no longer had any doubts and flew out of Bushutian. Azure Saint and the others followed one after another. When the four of them arrived in the silence, they realized that it was just as Zhang Yan had said. That existence's qi activity was fluctuating. It was obvious that he was fighting with someone, and the collision of his dermic powers was so intense that it caused such a situation. They were also extremely surprised. There was actually someone who didn't hide when that existence came, and even dared to take the initiative to fight. At the same time, they also felt relieved. At the very least, that existence didn't have the mood to pay attention to them before the enemy was eliminated. At this moment, Zhang Yan was able to clearly sense that there was another peerlessly fierce aura that was intertwining and colliding with that existence. He was clearly unable to see who it was, yet it just so happened to give him a familiar feeling, and he couldn't help but fall into deep thought. On the other side, when Daoist Xian Che and that Daoren saw that the existence seemed to be stalled by someone, they thought that they could fight with Zhang Yan. However, they didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, there would be 4 fellow god refinement cultivators behind the latter. Both of their expressions changed. Daoist Xian Che sneered and said, "You said that I led outsiders here, but I didn't expect that you would be in the same situation as well. I wonder how you have the face to say that." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "You're wrong. This matter is an internal matter between our sects, and I definitely won't let outsiders handle it. Even if I fight with the two of you, I won't ask for help from these people." When he spoke up to hear, he looked at Daoist Xian Che and said, "I never had the intention to give the land left behind by the ancestral master to outsiders. These people are only here to avoid a disaster, and they're sheltering here with me. Unlike you, you actually gave such a place to others." Daoist Xian Che, however, didn't believe him. Although Zhang Yan said so, if they really fought, who knew if the others would take the initiative to help him? That Daoren secretly transmitted a message to him, "Fellow Daoist, there are 5 people on the other side, and there's no winning or losing in this battle. It's indeed not fellow Daoists' fault that we couldn't seize the land of fortune this time. We'll think of a way when we return. For now, it's better for us to leave this place and not alarm that existence." What they were most afraid of was that the commotion caused by the battle here would attract that existence's attention. If they were seen by that existence when they fled back, then the land of fortune that they were using as shelter would be discovered by that existence. Once they were targeted, it would be difficult for them to survive. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. This was a rare opportunity, and it just so happened that that existence was being held up. He might as well take down these 2 people first, and then gather the strength of everyone else to see if they could save Quan Dao and Xian Che. He said indifferently, "Fellow Daoist Xian Che, since you've given the land of fortune behind you to an outsider, then it's no longer related to you. However, I will find a way to take it back. However, if you're willing to cut ties with that existence, I can also protect you here." Daoist Xian Che glanced at him and said, "You don't have to say such words, sir. How can I betray an alliance?" A thought flashed in Zhang Yan's mind. Logically speaking, as they were of the same bloodline, he was more trustworthy than an outsider. However, it seemed like Daoist Xian Che had no intention of standing on his side. There was no such thing as a promise between spirit refinement cultivators. If Daoist Xian Che really valued this, he wouldn't have disregarded the arrangements left behind by the ancestral master. Therefore, there must be some kind of reason that forced him to follow these outsiders. He was only giving Daoist Xian Che one last chance out of consideration for the ancestral master. Since Daoist Xian Che was unwilling, then he couldn't be blamed. He immediately changed his mind, and a boundless wave of Wei Li pressed forward. In the blink of an eye, his transcendence energy was pushed up by several levels. Not only that, he also activated Bushtian's Weili at the same time, striving to suppress these two people in the shortest time possible.